Just drink it. Cheers. Thoughtful, I swished the liquid around in my mouth. It was bitter and carbonated and alcoholic and definitely beer. It filled me with confidence and a renewed sense of purpose. I'd had a scare, but it's funny how it and the beer were now focusing my mind wonderfully. I shared my booth with Richard, Josh, and Anais. I had successfully avoided sitting next to either Alice or Janet, or Penny, and they exchanged multiple transverse glances over their foamy pints. They were a long way from where they'd started out that morning.
I don't think that bear is stuff. I think that's a real bear.
Memes. Let's buy it a beer.
And anyway, it doesn't look that friendly.
Amused beer might help with that. This could be the next clue. If it's a talking bear, we could, talk to it.
About what?
Thoughtful. I shrugged and took another sip. Just get a feel for what's going on around here. What else are we doing here? Richard and Anais hadn't touched their drinks. I took another big gulp just to spite them.
We're playing it safe is what we're doing. This is strictly reconnaissance. We're avoiding any unnecessary contact.
You're kidding me. We're in Fillory and you don't want to talk to anybody?
Absolutely not. We made contact with another plane of existence. What? That's not enough for you?
As a matter of fact, it's not. A giant praying mantis tried to kill me earlier today, and I'd like to know why. Fillory had yet to give me the surcease from unhappiness I was counting on, and I was damned if I was leaving before I got what I wanted. Relief was out there, I knew it, I just needed to get deeper in, and I wasn't about to let Richard slow me down. I had to jump the tracks, get out of my Earth story, which wasn't going so well, and into the Fillory story, where the upside was infinitely higher. Anyway, the mood I was in, I was willing to take any position on any subject with anybody if it meant I could pick a fight. Barkeep. Another round for ma friend the bar there in the corner. A bar in a bar. Clever. In the other booth, Elliot, Alice, Janet, and Penny all turned around in unison to look at me. The man in the uniform just nodded wearily.
The bear had emerged, drank only peach schnapps, which it sipped from delicate thimble-sized glasses. Given its bulk, Quentin guessed it could consume a more or less unlimited amount of it. After 2 or 3, it ambled over on all fours and joined them, dragging over the heavy armchair, the only piece of furniture in the room capable of supporting its weight, by hooking its claws into the chair's much-abused upholstery and pulling. It looked way too big to be moving around in a confined space. The bear was named Humbledrum, and it was, as its name suggested, a very modest bear. It was a brown bear, it explained in deep subwoofer tones, a species larger than the black bear but much, much smaller than the mighty grizzly bear, though the grizzly was in fact a variety of brown bear. It was not, Humbledrum reiterated periodically, half the bear that some of those grizzlies were.
But it's not just about who's the biggest bear. There's other ways to be a good bear. Thoughtful, we were bonding. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted from the bear, but this seemed like a good way to get it. I was drinking Richard's beer, having finished my own.
Humbledrum's head bobbed enthusiastically.
Oh yes, I am a good bear. I never meant to say that I'm a bad bear. I'm a good bear. I respect territories. I'm a respectful bear.
Humbledrum's terrifyingly huge paw fell on the table, emphatically, and it put its black muzzle very close to Quentin's nose.
I am a very respectful bear.
The others were conspicuously silent, or talked among themselves, elaborately play-acting that they were unaware of the fact that Quentin was conversing with a drunk magic bear. Richard had bailed out early, swapping places with the always-game Janet. Josh and Anais huddled together, looking trapped. If Humbledrum noticed any of this, it didn't seem to bother it.
I understood that I was operating outside most of the group's comfort level. I could see out of the corner of my eye that Elliot was trying to shoot me warning glances from the other table, but I avoided them. I didn't care. I had to push things forward. I was afraid of staying still. This was my play, and I was playing it, and I was going to play it my way till it was played out. Everybody else could either get on board or button their candy asses on back to Drop City. It wasn't like what I was doing was easy. The range of Humbledrum's interests was suffocatingly narrow, and its depth of knowledge in those areas abysmally profound. I still vaguely remembered being a goose, how laser-focused I'd been on air currents and freshwater greenery, and I realized now that all animals were probably, at heart, insufferable bores. As a hibernating mammal, Humbledrum had far more than the layman's familiarity with cave geology. When it came to honey, it was the subtlest and most sophisticated of gastronomes. I learned quickly to steer the conversation away from chestnuts. So, just to be clear, this is Fillory we're in, right?
The lecture ground to a halt. Under its fur, Humbledrum's massive brow furrowed, producing a vivid equivalent of human befuddlement.
What is, Quentin?
This place we're in, right now, it's called Fillory.
A long moment passed. Humbledrum's ears twitched. It had impossibly cute, round, furry teddy bear ears.
Fillory. That is a word I have heard.
The giant bear sounded like a kid at the blackboard hedging his bets against what might or might not be a trick question.
And this is it? We're in Fillory?
I think it may once have been.
So what do you call it now?
Thoughtful, no. No. Wait, yes, it is. This is Fillory. Or Loria? Is this Loria?
It has to be Fillory. Loria is the evil country across the eastern mountains. It's not like there's no difference. How can you not know where you live?
The bear was still shaking its heavy muzzle.
I think Fillory is somewhere else.
But this definitely isn't Loria.
Look, who's the talking bear here? Is it you? Are you the talking fucking bear? Alright, so shut the fuck up.
Outside the bar, the sun had set, and a few other creatures trailed in. 3 beavers sipped from a common dish at a round cafe table in the company of a fat, green, oddly alert-looking cricket. In one corner, by itself, a white goat lapped at what looked like pale yellow wine in a shallow bowl. A slender, shy-looking man with horns jutting through his blonde hair sat at the bar. He wore round glasses, and the lower half of his body was covered in thick, bushy hair. The whole scene had a dreamlike quality, like a Chagall painting come to life. In passing, Quentin noted how disturbing it was to see a man with goat's legs. Those backward-bending knees reminded him of the crippled or the gravely deformed.
Thoughtful, as the inn filled up the silent family rows as one and shuffled out of their booth, their expressions still somber. Where could they be going? I wondered. I'd seen no sign of a village nearby. It was getting late, and I wondered if they had a long walk ahead of them. I pictured them trudging down the grooved dirt road in the moonlight, the little girl riding on the old man's narrow shoulders, and then later, when she was too tired even for that, drooling drowsily on his lapel. I felt chastened by their gravity. They made me feel like a bumptious tourist rattling drunkenly around what was, I kept forgetting, their country, a real country with real people in it, not a storybook at all. Or was it? Should I run after them? What secrets were they taking with them? When she reached to open the door, I saw that the woman with the elegant cheekbones had lost her right arm below the elbow.
After another round of schnapps and scintillating persiflage with Humbledrum, the little silver birch sapling emerged from wherever it had been concealing itself and threaded its way through the room toward them, padding on feet of matted roots which still had clods of dirt clinging to them.
I am Farvel.
It looked even stranger in the full light of the bar. It was a literal stick figure. There were talking trees in the Fillory books, but Plover was never very precise in describing their appearance. Farvel spoke through what looked like a lateral cut in its bark, the kind of wedge that a single hatchet blow might have left. The remainder of its features were sketched out by a spray of thin branches covered in fluttering green leaves, which roughly limned the outlines of 2 eyes and a nose. He looked like a green man carving in a church, except that his flat little mouth gave him a comically sour expression.
Please pardon my rudeness earlier. I was disconcerted. It is so rare to meet travelers from other lands. What brings you here, human boy?
It had brought a stool from the bar, and now it bent itself into a rough sitting position. It looked a little like a chair itself.
At last. Here we go. The next level. Oh, I don't know. Curiosity mostly, I guess. We found this button. That let us travel between worlds, and we were all sort of at loose ends on Earth anyway, so we just came over here, see what we could see, that kind of a thing. Thoughtful. Obviously, I was emerging as the designated point person, the team's natural first contact specialist. The bartender joined them as well, having been replaced at his station by a solemn, dignified chimp with a hangdog face. Even half drunk, that sounded a lot lamer than I'd hoped. Even Janet was looking at me with concern. God, I hoped Alice wasn't listening. I smiled weakly, trying to play it cool. I wished I hadn't had quite so much beer on quite such an empty, weary stomach.
Of course, of course. And what have you seen so far?
The bartender watched Quentin steadily. He sat back to front on a cane chair, his arms resting on the seat back.
Oh, well, we ran into a river nymph who gave us a horn. A magic horn, I think. And then this bug, this insect, in a carriage. I guess it was a praying mantis. It shot an arrow at me. That almost hit me. Worried, I knew I should probably be playing this closer to the vest, but which part should I be leaving out exactly? How did those calculations work? The rigors of keeping pace with Humbledrum had left me a shade less than razor keen. But Farvel didn't seem put off. He just nodded sympathetically.
The chimp came out from behind the bar to place a lighted candle on their table, along with another round of pints, this time on the house.
You guys don't work for the Watcher Woman, do you? Or, I mean, like, secretly? Not like you want to, but you have to?
Jesus. Penny.
Worried? Oh, I suppose you could say. But no, one shouldn't say. Oh dear, oh dear.
A charged glance passed between him and the bartender. Its composure thoroughly disrupted the little treelet. The picture of arboreal distress let its branches droop a little, and its green birch leaves fluttered anxiously.
Neutral, I like a touch of lavender in my honey. You want the bees to nest near a good-sized field of it. Downwind if you can manage it. That's the real trick of it, in a nutshell.
Farvel wrapped one slender twig hand around its glass and tipped some beer into its mouth. After a visible struggle with itself, the tree spirit began again.
Young human, what you suppose is true, in a sense. We do not love her, but we fear her. Everybody does. Who knows what's good for them? She has not yet succeeded in slowing the advance of time, not yet. But she hungers to. We see her sometimes from far away. She moves through the forest. She lives in the treetops. She has lost her wand, they say, but she will find it again soon, or fashion a new one. And then what? Can you imagine it? That eternal sunset? All will be confused, with no boundaries to separate them. The day animals and the night creatures will go to war with each other. The forest will die. The red sun will bleed out over the land until it is as white as the moon.
But I thought the witch was dead. I thought the Chatwinds killed her.
So she was listening. How could she sound so calm?
Another glance passed between Farvel and the bartender.
Worried? Well, that's as may be. It was long ago, and we are far from the capital here, but the Rams have not shown themselves here for many a year, and here in the country living and dead are not such simple things, especially when witches come into it, and she has been...
The Watcher Woman has.
Oh, yes, Humbledrum saw her, slender she was, and veiled.
We heard her. We heard a clock ticking in the woods.
The bear just stared into his glass of schnapps with small, watery eyes.
So, the Watcher Woman, is this a problem we can, help you with?
All of a sudden, I felt supremely tired. The alcohol in my system, which had thus far been acting as a stimulant, without warning flipped to a chemical isomorph of itself and became a sedative instead. Where before I'd been burning it like rocket fuel, now it was gumming up the works. It was dragging me down. My brain began to shut down non-essential operations. Somewhere in my core, the self-destruct countdown had begun. I sat back in the booth and allowed my eyes to glaze over. This was the moment that should have galvanized me into action. The moment that all those years at Brakebills had been leading up to, but instead, I was letting go, sinking down into dysphoria. Whatever, if Penny wanted to take this over, let it be his show from now on. He had Alice. Why shouldn't he have Fillory too? The time for clever thinking had passed anyway. The tree was clearly taking their bait, or they were taking its bait, or both. Either way, here it was, the adventure had arrived. There was a time when this had been my most passionate hope, when it would have ravished me with happiness. It was just so weird, I thought, sadly. Why now, when it was actually happening, did the seductions of Fillory feel so crude and unwanted, its groping hands so clumsy? I thought I'd left this feeling behind long ago in Brooklyn, or at least at Brakebills. How could it have followed me here of all places? How far did I have to run? If Fillory failed me, I would have nothing left. A wave of frustration and panic surged through me. I had to get rid of it, break the pattern. Or maybe this was different. Maybe there really was something off here. Maybe the hollowness was in Fillory, not in me.
He slid warily out of the booth, rubbing up against Humbledrum's huge scratchy thigh on his way out, and visited the restroom, a malodorous pit-style affair. He thought for a second that he might be sick into it, and that maybe that wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, but nothing happened. When he got back, Penny had taken his seat. He took Penny's place in the other booth and rested his chin in his hands and his hands on the table. If only they had drugs. Getting high in Fillory, that would really be the ultimate. Elliot had moved to the bar and appeared to be chatting up the horned man.
What this land needs is kings and queens. The thrones in Castle Whitespire have been empty for too long, and they can only be filled by the sons and daughters of Earth, by your kind. But only the stout of heart could hope to win those seats, you understand. Only the stoutest of heart.
Farvel looked on the verge of squeezing out a viscous, sappy tear. Jesus, what a speech. I could practically have recited his lines for him.
So what would this involve exactly? Winning, as you say, those seats?
What it involved, Farvel explained, was a visit to a perilous ruin called Ember's Tomb. Somewhere within the tomb was a crown, a silver crown that had once been worn by the noble King Martin centuries ago when the Chatwins reigned. If they could recover the crown and bring it to Castle Whitespire, then they could occupy the thrones themselves, or 4 of them could anyway, and become kings and queens of Fillory and end the threat of the Watcher Woman forever. But it wouldn't be easy.
So do we absolutely need this crown? Otherwise what? It won't work?
There is no other way. But you will have help. There will be guides for you.
Ember's too? Wait a minute. Does that mean Ember's dead? And what about Umber?
Oh, no, no, no. It is just a name, a traditional name. It means nothing. It has just been so long since Ember was seen in these parts.
Ember is the eagle?
The ram, one of them, Widewings, was the eagle. He was a false king.
How can you not know who Ember is?
Oh, dear. Do not judge the bear too harshly. You must understand we are very far from the capital here, and many have ruled these green hills, or tried since the last time you children of Earth walked them. The silver years of the Chatwins are long ago now, and the years since have been forged from baser metals. You cannot imagine the chaos we have suffered through. There was Widewings the Eagle, and after him, the Wrought Iron Man, the Lily Witch, the Spear Carrier, the Saint Anselm. There was the Lost Lamb, and the vicious depredations of the very tallest tree. And you know, we are so very far from the capital here, and it is very confusing. I am only a birch, you know, and not a very large one.
A leaf fluttered to the table, a single green tear.
I have a question. If this crown is so damn important, and Ember and Umber and Amber or whatever are so powerful, why don't they just go get it themselves?
Ah, well, there's laws. They can't, you see. There's higher laws that even such as they are bound by. It must be you who retrieve the crown. It can only be you.
We have lived too long. Ho. I supposed it all made sense. Ember and Umber absent. A power vacuum. An insurgent Watcher Woman emerging from whatever witchy quasi-death she'd suffered at the Chatwins' hands. Penny had been right after all. They'd gotten a quest. Their role was clear. It had a pat, theme park quality to it, like they were on some fantasy camp role-playing vacation, but it did make sense. I could still hope. But let's be sure. I don't want to sound crass, but Ember and Umber are the big shots around here, right? I mean, of all those people, things, whatever you mentioned, they're the most powerful and morally righteous or whatever. Let's be clear on this for a second. I want to be sure we're backing the right horse. Or ram. Whatever.
Of course. It would be folly to think otherwise.
Farvel shushed him, looking worriedly over at the table of beavers, who didn't seem to be paying them any attention. But you couldn't be too careful. Bizarrely, Farvel produced a cigarette from somewhere and lit it from the candle on the table, careful not to ignite any part of itself. It protruded jauntily from the tree's little cleft mouth. The thing must have a death wish. Aromatic smoke rose up through the leafy corona of its face.
Only do not judge us too harshly. The rams have been absent for many years. We have had to carry on without them. Make our own way. The forest must live.
Elliot and the horned man had vanished, presumably together. Incorrigible. That man. It cheered me up by a scintilla that somebody at least was having a good time. The white goat slurped its yellow wine loudly in its corner. Humbledrum just gazed sorrowfully into its schnapps. I reminded myself, as if I had almost forgotten the fact, that I was very far from home, in a room full of animals drinking alcohol. We have lived too long. The great days are past.
They stayed at the inn that night. The rooms were carved hobbit-style into the hill behind the main cabin. They were comfortable, windowless, and silent, and Quentin slept like the dead.
Thoughtful in the morning, we sat at a long table in the bar, eating fresh eggs and toast and drinking cold water out of stone jugs, our backpacks piled up in a heap in one of the booths. Apparently, Richard's gold cylinders went a long way in the Fillorian economy. I felt clear-eyed and miraculously unhungover. My restored faculties appreciated, with a cold, new keenness, the many painful aspects of my recent personal history. But they also allowed me to really appreciate, almost, for the first time, the reality of my physical presence in actual Fullery. It was all so detailed and vivid compared to my cartoonish fantasies. The room had the seedy, humiliated look of a bar seen in direct sunlight, sticky and thoroughly initialed by knife and claw-wielding patrons. The floor was paved with old round millstones lightly covered with a scattering of straw, the chinks between them filled in with packed dirt. Neither Farvel nor Humbledrum nor the bartender were anywhere in sight. We were served by a brusque but otherwise attentive dwarf.
Also in the dining room were a man and a woman who sat opposite each other by a window, sipping coffee and saying nothing, and glancing over at the Brakebills table every once in a while. Quentin had the distinct impression that they were just killing time, waiting for him and the others to finish their breakfast. That proved to be the case. When the table was cleared, the pair introduced themselves as Dint the man and Fen. Both were 40-ish and weather-beaten, as if they spent a lot of time outdoors in a professional capacity. They were, Dint explained, the guides. They would take the party to Ember's tomb in search of King Martin's crown. Dint was tall and skinny, with a big nose and huge black eyebrows that together took up most of his face. He was dressed all in black and wore a long cape, apparently as an expression of the extreme seriousness with which he regarded himself and his abilities. Fen was shorter and denser and more muscular with close-cropped blonde hair. With a whistle around her neck, she could have been a gym teacher at a private school for girls. Her clothes were loose-fitting and practical, evidently designed for ease of movement in unpredictable situations. She projected both toughness and kindness, and she wore high boots with fascinatingly complex laces. She was, to the best of Quentin's ability to gauge these things, a lesbian. Cool! Autumn sunlight slotted through the narrow windows cut in the heavy log walls of the two moons. Sober, Quentin felt more eager than ever to get on with it.
I looked hard at my beautiful, despoiled Alice. My anger at her was a hard nugget I didn't know if I could ever digest. A kidney stone. Maybe when we were kings and queens. Maybe then I could have Penny executed. A palace coup, and definitely not a bloodless one.
Penny proposed that they all swear an oath together to celebrate their shared high purpose, but it seemed like overkill. And anyway, he couldn't muster a quorum. They were all shrugging into their packs when Richard abruptly announced that they could go if they wanted, but he would be staying behind at the inn. No one knew how to react. Janet tried to joke him out of it. Then when that didn't work, she pleaded with him.
Furious, but we've come this far together. We can always turn back if things get sketchy. Or in an emergency, we can use the button as a ripcord. I think you're way overreacting.
Well, and I think you're underreacting, and I think you can count on the authorities to overreact when they find out about how far you're taking this.
If they find out about it, which they will not.
When they find out about it, this is going to be the discovery of the century, and we are going to make history, and you're missing out on it. And if you can't see that, I frankly have no idea why you came along in the first place.
I came along to keep you people from doing anything stupid, which is what I'm trying to do right now.
Whatever. Nobody cares if you come or not. There are only 4 thrones anyway.
She put a hand in his face, then walked away, her own face crumpling.
Thoughtful, I half expected Alice to join Richard. She looked like she was hanging onto her nerve by the very tips of her fingers. I wondered why she hadn't bolted already. She was way too sensible for a random lark like this. I felt the opposite way. The danger would be going back, or staying still. The only way out was through. The past was ruins, but the present was still in play. They would have to tie me down to keep me from going to Ember's tomb.
Richard would not be dislodged, so in the end they set off in a loose pack without him, with Dint and Fen walking ahead. They followed yesterday's carriage path for only a short while before striking out at an angle into the woods. For all the glory of their high and noble purpose, it felt like they were going on a summer camp nature hike, or a junior high field trip, with the kids goofing off and the two counselors looking dour and superior and grown up and blaring them back into line when they strayed too far. For the first time since they came to Fillory, everybody was relaxing and being themselves instead of playing intrepid explorer heroes. Low stone walls traversed the forest floor, and they took turns balancing along them. Nobody knew who had built them, or why. Josh said something about where was the damn cozy horse when you needed it. Before long they emerged from the forest into a maze of sunlit meadows, and then into open farmland.
It would not have been hard to get Alice alone. But whenever I rehearsed what I wanted to say, however well it began, I got to a point where I had to ask her what happened with Penny, and then the dream sequence just went white, like a film of a nuclear blast. Instead, I made conversation with the guides.
Neither of them was very talkative. Dint did show a flicker of interest when he learned that the visitors were magicians too. But they turned out not to have much in common. His entire expertise was in battle magic. He was barely aware that there were other kinds.
I had the impression he was loath to give away any trade secrets. But he did open up about one thing.
I sewed this myself. I keep herbs in here, powders, whatever I might need in the field. If I'm casting something with a material component, I can just, like this, and I'm ready to go!
He executed a series of rapid pinching and dispensing motions that he'd obviously spent a lot of time practicing. Then the dour facade descended again, and he went back to his silent brooding. He carried a wand, which almost nobody at Brakebills did. It was considered slightly embarrassing, like training wheels or a marital aid. Fen was more overtly friendly, but at the same time harder to read. She wasn't a magician, and she carried no obvious weapons, but it was understood that of the two of them she was the muscle. As far as Quentin could make out, she was some kind of martial artist. She called the discipline she practiced in kata, an untranslatable phrase from a language Quentin had never heard of. She kept to a strict regimen. She couldn't wear armor or touch silver or gold, and she ate practically nothing. What Inkaga looked like in practice was impossible for Quentin to fathom. She would talk about it only in high-flown abstract metaphors. She and Dent were both adventurers by profession.
There aren't many of us now. Humans. I mean, Fillory is a wild place and getting wilder. The forest is spreading, getting deeper and darker. Every summer, we cut down the trees, burn them down sometimes, and then mark the borders of the woods. The next summer, the borders are buried 100 yards deep. The trees eat the farms, and the farmers come to live in the towns. But where will we live when all of Fillory is forest? When I was a girl, the 2 Moons was an open country. The animals don't care. They like it this way.
Thoughtful, she lapsed into silence. I thought it might be a good time to change the subject. I felt like a green-as-grass PFC from Dubuque, Iowa, trading banter with the hardened South Vietnamese regular attached to my unit. So, I don't mean to sound crass, but are we paying you for this? Or is somebody?
If we succeed, that will be payment enough.
But why would you want somebody from our world to be king anyway? Who you don't even know? Why not somebody from Fillory?
Only your kind can sit the thrones of Castle White Spire. It's the law. Always has been.
But that makes no sense. And this is speaking as the beneficiary of the law here.
Fen grimaced. Her protuberant eyes and full lips gave her face a fishy cast.
Our people have been slaughtering and betraying one another for centuries. Quentin, how can you be any worse? The rule of the Chatwins is the last peaceful time anyone can remember. You don't know anyone here. You have no history, no scores to settle. You belong to no faction. It makes perfect political sense. We have reached the point where ignorance and neglect are the best we can hope for in a ruler.
They hiked through slow-rolling hills for the rest of the day. their thumbs hooked in the straps of their backpacks, sometimes along chalk roads, sometimes cutting across fields, crickets jumping up out of the long grass to get out of their way. The air was cool and clean.
Thoughtful, it was an easy hike, a beginner's hike. There was singing. Elliot pointed out a ridge that he said was positively screaming to have Pinot grapes planted on it. At no point did they see a town or another traveler. The rare tree or fence post they passed cast a crisp shadow on the ground, straight and clear, like it was etched there. It made me wonder how Fillory really worked. There was hardly any central government, so what would a king actually do? The entire political economy appeared to be frozen in the feudal Middle Ages, but there were elements of Victorian-level technology as well. Who had made that beautiful Victorian carriage? What craftsman wove the innards of the clockwork mechanisms that were so ubiquitous in Fillory? Or were those things done by magic? Either way, they must keep Fillory in its pre-industrial agrarian state on purpose, by choice. Like the Amish.
At noon, they witnessed one of Fillory's famous daily eclipses, and they observed something that was described in none of the books. Instead of being a sphere, the moon of Fillory was formed in the shape of an actual literal crescent, an elegant silvery arc that sailed through the sky, rotating slowly around its empty center of gravity. They made camp at sunset in a ragged square scrap of meadow. Ember's tomb, Dent told them, was in the next valley over, and they wouldn't want to spend the night any closer to it. He and Fen divided the watches between them. Penny volunteered to take one, but they declined. They ate some roast beef sandwiches they'd been saving since the house upstate and unrolled sleeping bags and slept in the open, their bodies pressing flat the tough, coarse green grass underneath. I remembers Tom. The hill was smooth and green. Set into its base was a simple post and lintel doorway, two enormous rough stone slabs standing upright with a third slab laid across them. In the space between them was darkness. It reminded Quentin of a subway entrance. It was just dawn, and the door was on the western face of the hill, so the hill's shadow fell over them. The grass was frosted with pale dew. There was no sound at all. The shape of the hill was a pure emerald green sine wave against the lightening sky. Whatever was going to happen here.
Worried, we stopped and huddled 100 yards away, miserable and unshowered, to pull ourselves together. The morning was chilly. I rubbed my hands together and tried a warmth spell that only left me feeling feverish and slightly queasy. I couldn't seem to get oriented to Fillory's circumstances. I had slept heavily the night before, with vivid dreams, the weight of my fatigue sinking me down into dark primal realms haunted by roaring winds and tiny furry beasts, early mammals hiding fearfully in the long grass. I wished I could just stand here a little longer and look at the pink light on the dew. Everybody had a heavy hunting knife, which back on Earth had seemed beyond overkill, but now felt pathetically inadequate. Thoughtful, the shape of the hill tugged at something in my deep memory. I thought of the hill we'd seen in that enchanted mirror, in that musty little storeroom back at Brakebills, where Alice and Penny and I had studied together so long ago. It looked like the same hill. But so did 1,000 hills. It was just a hill.
So just to be clear, it's called Ember's tomb, but Ember isn't buried here, and he's not dead.
Thoughtful, he sounded exactly as relaxed and unworried as he ever had back at Brakebills, just dotting the I's, clearing up the details, the way he would have insouciantly picked apart one of Bigby's problem sets, or decoded a closely written wine label. He was in control. The deeper we rolled into Fillory, the shakier I felt, but Elliot was the opposite. He just got calmer and more sure of himself, exactly the way I had thought that I, Quentin, would, and exactly the way that I wasn't.
Every age finds a use for this place, a mine, a fortress, a treasure house, a prison, a tomb. Some dug it deeper, others walled up the parts they didn't need or wished to forget. It is one of the deep ruins.
So you've been here before? I need. Ah. Mais?
Neutral Fen shook her head.
Neutral, not this one. 100 places like it.
Except that the crown is in this one. And how did it get there exactly?
Thoughtful, I had wondered that same thing. If the crown really had belonged to Martin, maybe that was where he went when he disappeared. Maybe he died down there.
The crown is there. We will go in and get it. Enough questions.
He swirled his cape impatiently. Alice was standing very near Quentin. She looked small and still and cold.
Quentin, I don't want to go in there.
Over the past week, I had devoted literally hours to fantasizing about what I would say to Alice if she ever spoke to me again. But all my carefully planned speeches fell away at the sound of her voice. She wasn't going to get a speech. It was so much easier to be angry. Being angry made me feel strong, even though, in this contradiction, did nothing to diminish my anger. I was angry only because my position was so weak. So, go home. That wasn't right either. But it was too late, because somebody was running toward them.
The weird thing was that the entrance to the tomb was still 100 yards off, and Quentin could see the creatures coming the whole way. 2 of them running flat out across the wet grass for at least a minute, like they were out doing early morning wind sprints. It was almost funny. They weren't human, and they didn't seem to belong to the same species as each other either. But they were both cute. One was something like a giant hare, squat and covered in gray-brown fur, maybe 4 feet tall and about that wide. It hopped toward them determinedly, its long ears flattened back. The other one was more like a ferret, or maybe a meerkat.
A weasel?
Quentin tried to think what the closest equivalent furry animal would be. Whatever it was, it ran upright, and it was tall, 7 feet at least, most of it long, silky torso. Its face was chinless, with prominent front teeth. This odd couple came charging at them across the green grass silently. No battle cry, no soundtrack, in the still early morning air. At first, it looked like they might be running to greet them, but Bunny had short, stubby swords in both its front paws, held out steady in front of him as he ran, and Ferret was hefting a quarterstaff. They closed within 50 yards. The Brakebills crowd shrank back involuntarily, as if the newcomers exerted an invisible force field. This was it. They had come to the end of what was conceivable. Something was about to give. It had to. Dint and Fen didn't move. Quentin realized there wasn't going to be any parley or rock, paper, scissors. This was going to be about stabbing. He had thought he was ready, but he wasn't. Somebody had to stop it. The girls were hanging on to each other as if in a howling wind, even Alice and Janet.
Oh my God, this is really happening. This is really happening.
Ferret arrived first. It stutter stepped to a jittery stop, breathing hard. Its huge eyes blinked as it smoothly spun its staff two-handed in a figure-8 pattern. It whickered in the still air.
Huh.
Ha!
They set themselves side by side as if they were getting ready to lift something heavy. Then Dint stepped back, ceding first blood.
Jesus. 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 I wasn't ready for this. This wasn't magic. This was the opposite of magic. The world was ripping open.
Ferret fainted once and snapped a nasty jab at Fen's face. The 2 ends of the quarterstaff were now glowing, an ominous, enchanted orange, like the tip of a cigarette. Even as one end of the staff whipped forward, Fen turned away from it, bowing forward at the waist, ducking the jab and turning seamlessly, almost lazily, into a graceful, spinning roundhouse kick. She seemed to be moving slowly, but her foot clocked Ferret's weak chin hard enough to spin its head around a quarter turn. Ferret grinned, with blood in its big teeth, but it had more bad news coming. Fen was still spinning, and her next kick connected low and hard with the side of its knee. The knee bent in sideways wrongly. Ferret staggered and aimed the same jab at Fen's face, whereupon Fen caught the flashing quarterstaff barehanded. The smack of it hitting her open palm was like a rifle shot. She dropped her slick martial arts elegance and tussled savagely, messily for control. For a second they froze, vibrating with isometric strain while Ferret, with agonizing comical slowness, stretched its neck forward to try to bite Fen's bare throat with its big rodent incisors. But she had it out-muscled. Fen slowly forced the staff up under its chin, right into where its Adam's apple would be, while her right foot stamped pneumatically on the outside of its hurt knee. Over and over again, it gagged and twisted away. Just as Quentin thought he couldn't watch anymore, Ferret made its last mistake. It took its paw off the quarterstaff for an instant. It looked like it was going for a knife strapped to its thigh. With the extra leverage, Fen flung it down hard on the turf and the wind huffed out of it.
Huh.
She stamped twice on its thickly furred throat, hard. A long, gargling rattle followed, the first sound Quentin had heard it make. Fen popped up, visibly amped, her face red under her blonde buzz cut. She picked up the quarterstaff, braced herself, and broke it over her knee in one try. Throwing the broken pieces aside, she leaned down and screamed in Ferret's face.
Page pie,
The broken ends of the staff spat out a few feeble burnt orange sparks on the grass. 60 seconds had passed, maybe not even that.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Someone was throwing up on the grass. It had never once even occurred to me to try to help. I wasn't ready for this. This wasn't what I'd come here for.
Meanwhile, the other assassin, the squat muscular bunny, had never arrived on the scene. Dint had done something to the ground beneath its long rabbit feet, or maybe to its sense of balance, so that it couldn't seem to stand up. It was scrabbling around helplessly on the grass like it was wet ice. Fen, on a roll, stepped over Ferret's body toward him, but Dint stopped her. He turned back to the Brakebills crowd.
Can any of you take him from here? Bow and arrow, maybe? Anybody? Anybody?
Quentin couldn't tell if he was pissed that they weren't helping or if he was just being polite, offering them a taste of the action. Nobody answered. They stared at him like he was speaking gibberish. Every time the muscle-bound hare tried to get up, its paws kept flying out from under it. Chittering and weeping, the hare shouted a guttural cry and threw one of its swords at them. But it slipped again, and the sword landed safely short and off to one side. Dint waited for an answer from the group, then turned away disgustedly. He made a quiet tapping gesture with his wand, like he was ashing a cigar, and a bone in the hare's upper thigh snapped audibly. It screamed in falsetto.
Wait. Let me try.
The fact that Aeneas could even walk and talk right now was incomprehensible to Quentin. She began a spell but stuttered a few times, rattled, and had to start over. Dint waited, obviously impatient. On her third try, she completed a sleep spell that Penny had taught them. Bunny's grunting struggles ceased. It sagged onto its side on the grass, looking alarmingly sweet. Ferret was still gagging weakly, eyes open and staring at the sky, red foam pouring from its mouth. But nobody paid any attention to it. No part of it below its neck was moving. Aeneas went over and picked up the short sword the hare had thrown.
There. Now we kill it. No problem.
She hefted the sword happily in one hand.
As a teenager in Brooklyn, I had often imagined myself engaging in martial heroics, but after this I knew, as a cold and immutable fact, that I would do anything necessary, sacrificing whatever or whomever I had to avoid risking exposure to physical violence. I wasn't even ashamed. Shame never came into it. I embraced my new identity as a coward. I would run in the other direction. I would lie down and cry and put my arms over my head, or play dead. It didn't matter what I had to do. I would do it and be glad.
They trailed after Dint and Fen, and what kind of retarded names were those anyway? Dint and Fen? He thought numbly through the doorway and into the hill. He barely noticed his surroundings. A square stone corridor opened out into a huge open chamber that looked almost as big as the hill that contained it, which must have been mostly hollow. Green-tinted light filtered down through a circular oculus at the room's apex. The air was full of stone dust. The ruins of an enormous brass orrery stood in the center of the room, its skinny arms stripped of its planets. It looked like a broken, defoliated Christmas tree, the smashed spheres lying at its base like fallen ornaments. Nobody noticed a large 10-feet-long, large green lizard standing frozen amid the remains of shattered tables and benches until it abruptly unfroze and skittered off into the shadows, claws scritching on the stone floor. The horror was almost pleasant. It wiped away Alice and Janet and everything else except itself like a harsh, abrasive cleanser. They wandered from room to empty room down echoing stone hallways. The floor plan was beyond chaotic. The stonework changed styles and patterns every 20 minutes as a new generation of masons took over. They took turns putting light spells on their knives, their hands, various inappropriate body parts in an effort to break the tension. Having tasted blood, Anais now tagged after Dint and Fen like an eager puppy, lapping up whatever observations she could get out of them about personal combat.
They never had a chance. Even if Dint hadn't taken the second one, even if I had been alone, the quarterstaff is not a collaborative weapon. It simply takes up too much room. Once the tall one is into a form, those tips are flying left and right, up and down. He can't afford to worry about his friend. You face them one-on-one, and you move on. Thoughtful, they should have fallen back, waited for us together in that big chamber. Taken us by surprise.
Why didn't they? Why didn't they come running straight at us?
Thoughtful? I don't know. Could have been an honor thing. Could have been a bluff. They thought we'd run. Could be they were under a spell. They couldn't help it.
Did we have to kill them? Couldn't we have just, I don't know.
What? Maybe we could have taken them prisoner? We could have rehabilitated them.
I don't know. Tied them up? Look, I guess I just wasn't that clear on what it would actually be like, killing people. It made me think of the day the beast appeared, that same bottomless feeling. All bets off, like the cable had snapped, and we were in freefall.
Those are not people. Those were not people. And they tried to kill us first.
We were breaking into their home.
Glory has its price. Did you not know that before you sought it?
Well, I guess they paid the price for us, huh?
To Quentin's surprise, Elliot rounded on him too.
What? You're gonna back out? You? You need this almost as badly as I do.
I'm not backing out. I'm just saying. Thoughtful, I had time to wonder why exactly Elliot did need this before Anais cut them off.
Ah, God. Please, can we not? Can we all just not?
4 hours and 3 flights of stairs and 1 mile of empty corridor later, Quentin was examining a door when it opened suddenly, hard, smacking him in the face. He took a step backward and put a hand to his upper lip. In his half-stunned state, he was more preoccupied with whether or not his nose was bleeding than with who or what had just slammed the door into it. He raised the back of his hand to his upper lip, checked it, raised it again, then checked it again. Yep, definitely bleeding. An elfin being stuck its narrow, angry face around the edge of the door and glared at him. Purely by reflex, Quentin kicked it shut. He'd been about to point out the door to the others, who were busy surveying a wide, low-ceilinged room with a dry basin in the center. A creeping ivy-like plant had grown out of the basin and halfway up the walls and then died. Daylight was a months-ago memory. There were twinkly lights going off behind Quentin's eyes, and his nose felt like a warm, melting gob of something salty and throbbing. With melodramatic slowness, the door creaked open again, gradually revealing a slight, pointy-featured man wearing black leather armor. He didn't look particularly surprised to see Quentin. The man, elf, whatever, whipped a rapier out of his belt and snapped into a formal fencing stance. Quentin backed away, gritting his teeth with fear and resignation. Just like that, Fillory had vomited out another one of its malignant menagerie.
Maybe fatigue had dulled the edge of my fear, but almost unbeknownst to myself, I was enunciating the words to Penny's magic missile spell. I'd practiced it back in New York, and now I backpedaled as I cast it, because the black elf, as I tagged him, was advancing on me using a Ponzi sideways fencing shuffle, his free hand held aloft, wrist limp. I was getting the spell right, I could feel it, and I was loving myself for getting it right. Terror and physical pain sharpened and simplified my moral universe. I snapped the magical darts straight into the elf's chest.
The black elf coughed and sat down hard, looking dismayed. His face was the perfect height for kung fu kicking, so Quentin, in what felt like an act of consummate bravery, kicked him savagely in the face. The rapier clattered to one side.
It was like when I'd fought Penny, when the fear had left me. Was this battle rage at last? Was I going to become a berserker like Fen? It felt so good to stop being afraid.
Nobody else in the room had noticed what was going on. Not until he yelled. Now the scene tilted and slid into nightmare. 4 more black elves scrambled through the open door carrying an assortment of weapons, followed by 2 goat-legged men and 2 terrifying flying giant bumblebees the size of basketballs. Also present was something fleshy and headless that scrambled along on 4 legs, and a silent, wispy figure composed of white mist.
With the 2 teams arranged on their respective sides of the room, a staring match ensued. It all reminded me powerfully of the opening moments of a game of dodgeball. My body seethed. I wanted to cast the missile spell again. I'd gone from feeling frail and vulnerable and cowardly to feeling badass and supercharged and armor-plated. The 2 mercenaries were whispering and pointing, choosing up targets.
Fen picked up a pebble and tossed it lightly sidearm. At one of the fawns, they had evil fawns now, who let it bounce off a round leather buckler strapped to his forearm. He looked pissed.
The Grimling's the problem.
Yeah, leave the Pangborn now. I have something for that.
Dint withdrew a wand from his cape and appeared to write something in the air with it. He said a couple of words into the tip, like it was a microphone. Then he indicated one of the fawns with it, a conductor cooing a soloist. The fawn burst into flame.
It was like it was made of magnesium, soaked in gasoline, and had just been waiting for an errant spark to set it off. No part of it was not on fire. It took a step backward, then turned to the goat man next to it as if to say something. Then it fell down, and I couldn't look at it anymore. As all hell broke loose, I tried to hang on to the gleeful bloodlust I had felt so clearly a moment ago, to fan it back into life, but I'd lost it, fumbled it in the confusion.
Fen was thriving. This was evidently what she trained for. Quentin had missed it before, but she was actually mixing in a little magic as she fought her. Inkago is a hybrid technique, a martial art fully integrated with some highly specialized spellcasting style. Her lips moved, and there were white flashes where her fist and hand strikes landed. Meanwhile, Dint addressed himself to the ghostly, misty figure, saying something inaudible that caused it to struggle and then be dispersed by an invisible, soundless, roaring gale.
I took a quick inventory of my brave company. Elliot had made himself useful by casting a kinetic spell on the second satyr, pinning it safely to the ceiling. Anais had her short sword out. It had a moonlight shimmer to it, now, which meant she'd put a sharpness charm on it and was looking eagerly around for somebody to stick it into. Janet was hugging herself against the back wall, her face wet and shining with tears. Her eyes were blank. She was gone.
Too many things were happening at once. Quentin's stomach clenched when he realized an elf had singled Alice out and was advancing across the dry basin toward her, twirling a long, straight knife where they called poniards in each hand. It was obvious from Alice's face that every spell she'd ever learned had just now slipped her mind. She turned away, dropped to one knee, and locked her hands behind her head. Nobody in the history of all the conflicts in the world had ever looked more defenseless.
Worried, I only had time to feel all the tenderness I had ever felt for her surge up in one infinitely concentrated instant, and to be surprised that it was all still there, moist and intact beneath the unsightly scorched layer of my anger, before the back of Alice's blouse tore wide open and a small leathery biped clawed its way vigorously out of the skin of her back. It was a party trick, a showgirl bursting out of a cake. Alice had loosed her cacodemon.
No question. The cacodemon was instantly the happiest being in the room. This was exactly the party it wanted to be at. Facing the elf, it bounced on its toes like a wiry little tennis pro preparing for return of service with triple match point on its side. Its leap was evidently several beats faster than its opponent had counted on. In a moment, it was past the poniards and had fastened its wiry grip on the elf's upper arms and buried its horrible face in the soft hollow of the elf's throat. The elf gagged and sawed futilely at the demon's shark-skinned back with its knives. Quentin reminded himself for at least the 100th time never to underestimate Alice again. And just like that, it was over. They were out of opponents. The elves and the bees were down. The room was full of acid smoke from the burned satyr. Ben owned most of the body count. She was already running through a post-combat warm-down ritual, stepping backward through the forms she'd executed in the brief battle and whispering their names to herself.
Penny was carefully casting a sleep spell on the satyr that Elliot had stuck to the ceiling, while Anais watched impatient to administer the coup de grace. I noted, with the pettiest possible annoyance, that they had the satyr without the buckler, which meant that Dint had burned the satyr with the buckler, which meant that I couldn't loot the buckler for myself. I had a crusty, dried mustache from my bloody nose. Relieved, that wasn't so bad, I told myself. This wasn't such a nightmare. I risked a shuddering sigh of relief. Was that really it? Had they gotten everything?
Janet had finally thawed from her frozen state and was busy with something. Unlike everything else they'd seen, the fleshy, headless, four-legged creature was neither humanoid nor obviously related to any terrestrial fauna. It was radially symmetrical, like a starfish, with no obvious front or back or face. It stood unreadable in a dark corner, taking sudden scary little hops in unexpected directions. It had a large faceted gem embedded in its back. Or was that its eye, its brain?
Hey, leave that. Leave the gremlin to us.
Janet ignored her. She continued to take wary steps toward it. Quentin wished she wouldn't. She was in no kind of emotional state to be working magic.
Janet!
Shit.
It was a businesslike shit, another damn mess for him to clean up. He brought his wand back out from wherever he'd stashed it. But before he could act, Janet reached carefully behind her back and brought out something small but heavy. Gripping it with both hands, she made a small adjustment and then fired 5 shots into the creature at close range. The pistol bounced upward with each shot, and each time she carefully re-aimed it. The sound was shattering in the low-ceilinged chamber. One shot struck sparks off the jewel in the Grimling's back. It sank to the floor, shivering and deflating like a parade balloon, still expressionless. It made a high, urgent whistling sound. By the fifth shot, it was visibly dead. Nothing and nobody in the room moved. Janet turned around. The tears she had shed earlier were already dry. She glared at them.
What the fuck are you looking at?
It got colder the deeper they went. At 6 stories underground, Quentin was shivering in his heavy sweater and thinking nostalgically about the warm, puffy parkas they'd abandoned way back by the sunny little stream. They broke for a rest in a circular room with a beautiful lapis lazuli spiral inlaid in the floor. Dark green ambient light emanated from somewhere, like the light in an aquarium. Dint sat in the lotus position, wrapped his cape around him, and meditated. A gap of about 6 inches separated him from the floor. Fen did calisthenics. The break was clearly not for their benefit. They were like professional mountaineers, impatiently shepherding a herd of rich, fat cats up the slopes of Mount Everest. The Brakebills party was a package they were contractually obligated to deliver. Alice sat by herself on a stone bench, her back against a pillar, looking blankly at a mosaic on the wall depicting a sea monster, a creature like an octopus but much larger and with many more than 8 legs. Quentin straddled the bench at the other end, facing her. Her eyes flicked over to his for a long moment. There was not a hint of either contrition or forgiveness in them. He made sure his eyes looked the same. They watched the mosaic. The little squares that made up the sea creature were moving very slowly, rearranging themselves on the wall. The crude blue waves rolled along very gradually. It was easy decorative magic. There was a bathroom floor at Brakebills that had much the same effect. Alice felt like a black hole that was trying to pull him in, rip the flesh clean off him with its sheer toxic gravity. Finally, she took out her canteen and used it to wet a spare white sock.
Let's do something about your nose.
She reached out to dab at his face, but at the last minute he realized he didn't want her to touch him. He took the sock himself, carefully. It turned pink as he wiped at his upper lip.
So what was it like, when you let the demon out? Now that the high of combat was gone, and she was no longer in danger, my anger came creeping back. The anesthetic was wearing off. It was an effort not to say anything vicious.
She hiked her foot up onto the bench and started undoing the laces on her sneakers.
Thoughtful, it felt good, but was kind of a relief. Like sneezing. I never felt like I could really breathe with that thing inside me.
Interesting. Did it feel as good as fucking Penny? I'd actually thought I was going to be civil, but it was too hard. The words came out of my mouth of their own malevolent volition. I wondered what else I would say. I've got all kinds of demons inside of me, I thought. Not just the one.
If he'd managed to hurt Alice, she didn't let it show. She carefully peeled off a sock. A nasty white blister covered the entire ball of her foot. They watched the mosaic some more. A little boat had floated into the scene. A lifeboat, maybe, or a launch from a whaler. It was crowded with tiny people. It looked pretty much like a done deal that the sea creature was going to crush the little boat in its many long green arms.
That wasn't good.
So why did you do it?
Alice tilted her head, thoughtfully, but her face was white.
To get back at you. Because I was feeling like shit about myself. Because I didn't think you would care. Because I was drunk. And he came on pretty strong.
So he raped you?
No, Quentin. He did not.
Never mind. Stop talking.
I don't think I understood how much it would hurt you.
Just stop talking. I can't talk to you anymore. I can't hear anything you're saying. I'd started that little speech speaking normally, and I ended it shouting. In a way, fighting like this was just like using magic. You said the words, and they altered the universe. By merely speaking, you could create damage and pain, cause tears to fall, drive people away, make yourself feel better, make your life worse. I leaned forward, all the way forward, until I had placed my forehead on the cool marble of the bench in front of me. My eyes were closed. I wondered what time it was. My head felt a little spinny. I could fall asleep right there, I thought. Just like this. I wanted to tell Alice I didn't love her, but I couldn't because it wasn't true. It was the one lie I couldn't quite tell.
I wish this were over.
What?
This mission. This adventure. Whatever you want to call it. I want to go home.
I don't.
Somebody's going to get hurt.
Good. I hope they do. If I die doing this, at least I'll have done something. Maybe you'll do something one of these days instead of being such a pathetic little mouse all the time.
She said something he didn't catch.
What?
I said, don't talk to me about death. You don't know anything about it.
For no reason, and against my express conscious wishes, some very tight elastic band of muscle around my chest relaxed very slightly. Something between a laugh and a cough escaped me. I sank back against my pillar. God, I am literally losing my fucking mind.
Across the room, Anaya sat with Din, talking intently and going over a handmade map of their progress so far that he'd sketched on what looked suspiciously like graph paper. Anaya seemed more like a part of the guide's gang than the Brakebills gang now. As he watched, she bent over the map, deliberately smooshing her tit into Din's shoulder as she did so. Josh was nowhere to be seen. Penny and Elliot were dozing on the floor in the center of the room, their heads resting on their packs. Elliot had hectored Janet about the gun until he extracted a promise from her to dispose of it responsibly.
Do you even want this anymore, Quentin? I mean, what we're doing here, this kings and queens idea?
Of course I do. Thoughtful I'd almost forgotten why we were here, but it was true. A throne was exactly what I needed right now. Once we were ensconced in Castle-White spire, wreathed in glory, and every possible physical comfort, then maybe I could find the strength to come to grips with all this. You'd have to be an idiot not to.
You know the funny thing, though? I mean, the really hilarious thing? You actually don't. You don't even want it. Even if this whole thing came off without a hitch, you wouldn't be happy. You gave up on Brooklyn and on Brakebills, and I fully expect you to give up on Fillyri when the time comes. It makes things very simple for you, doesn't it? Well, and of course you were always going to give up on us. We had problems, but we could have fixed them. But that was too easy for you. It might actually have worked, and then where would you be? You would have been stuck with me forever.
Problems? We had problems? You fucked fucking Penny. I'd say that's a fucking problem.
People looked up. He dropped his voice to a furious whisper.
I will stop being a mouse, Quentin. I will take some chances. If you will, for just 1 second, look at your life and see how perfect it is. Stop looking for the next secret door that is going to lead you to your real life. Stop waiting. This is it. There's nothing else. It's here. And you'd better decide to enjoy it, or you're going to be miserable wherever you go. For the rest of your life, forever.
You can't just decide to be happy.
No, you can't. But you can sure as hell decide to be miserable. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the asshole who went to Fillyri and was miserable there? Even in Fillyri? Because that's who you are right now.
Thoughtful, there was something true about what Alice was saying. But I couldn't grasp it. It was too complex, or too simple. Too something. I thought of that first week I'd spent at Brakebills, when Elliot and I had gone sculling, and we'd watched the other rowers hunching and shivering in what to me was a warm summer day. That was what I looked like to Alice. It was strange. I'd thought that doing magic was the hardest thing I would ever do, but the rest of it was so much harder. It turned out that magic was the easy part.
Why did you come here, Alice? If you don't even want this? She looked at him evenly.
Why do you think, Quentin? I came because of you. I came here because I wanted to take care of you.
Thoughtful, I looked around at the others. I saw Janet sitting with her back against one wall with her eyes closed, though I didn't get the sense that she was asleep. The revolver was cradled in her lap. She wore a red t-shirt with a white star on it and khaki pants. She must be cold, I thought. As I watched, she sighed and licked her lips without opening her eyes, like a little girl. Thoughtful. I didn't want to be cold? Alice was still watching me. Behind her, the mosaic was a swirl of green tentacles and whitecaps and floating fragments. I slid down the stone bench to her end and kissed her, and bit her lower lip until she gasped.
After a certain point, it was no longer possible to ignore the fact that they were lost. The hallways wound fiendishly and branched frequently. They were in a maze, and they were not solving it. Dint had become obsessive about his map, which now stretched to half a dozen sheets of graph paper that he shuffled and scribbled on intently whenever they turned a corner. At Brakebills, they had learned a spell that would leave glowing footprints behind them, but Dint thought it would just lead predators straight to them. The walls were carved with ranks of crude marching figures in profile, thousands of them, each one holding a different totem, a palm leaf, a torch, a key, a sword, a pomegranate. It was darker here. They kept piling on light spells to anything that would take one, But the glow just didn't seem to go as far. They fast walked down the corridor double time now. The mood was that of a picnic threatened by lightning. The corridor branched and branched again and intermittently dead-ended, forcing them to backtrack. Quentin's feet hurt in his brand new hiking boots. A stray spur of something hard stabbed him in the same spot on his left ankle every time he took a step.
I risked a glance back the way we'd come. There was a red glow back there. Something somewhere in the maze was throwing off a deep crimson light. I felt a deep-seated lack of interest in finding out what it was.
10 minutes later, they got hung up at a fork in the passageway. Dint vigorously supporting the right fork. Josh making the case, admittedly largely on intangibles, that the other fork looked way more promising and just feels more like what we want. The walls were painted with oddly convincing Trompe-l'oeil landscapes now, crowded with tiny dancing figures. Doors slammed open and shut in the distance. The hallway was brightening behind them. They all saw it now. It was like a subterranean sun was rising. Discipline was getting ragged. They broke into a half run, and it was too dark for Quentin to be absolutely sure that nobody lagged behind. He focused on Alice. She was panting. The back of her blouse gaped palely open where the demon had torn its way out. He could see her black bra strap, which had somehow survived the operation. He wished he had a jacket to give her. He caught up with Dint.
Worried? We should slow down. We're going to lose somebody.
Dint shook his head.
They're tracking us now. If we stop, they'll mob us.
What the fuck, man? Didn't you plan for this?
This is the plan, Earthchild. You don't like it, go home. We need kings and queens and Fillories. That not a thing worth dying for.
Not really. Asshole. That slutty nymph was right. This is not your war.
They bowled through a door into a tapestry that was apparently concealing it from the other side. Behind the tapestry was a candlelit banquet hall set with food. Fresh and steaming. They were alone. It was as if the waiters who placed the dishes there had just moments earlier scampered out of sight. The table stretched out in both directions with no endpoints. The tapestries were rich and detailed, the silverware gleaming, the crystal goblets full of wine, deep gold and arterial purple. They stopped and stared in both directions, blinking. It was like they had stumbled into the dream of a starving man.
Nobody eats. Don't touch it. Nobody eats. Nobody drinks.
There are too many entrants. They can attack us.
She was right. A door opened farther down the hall, admitting two large, rangy individuals of the monkey family, though Quentin couldn't have said exactly what to call them. Their glazed simian eyes looked bored. In perfect synchrony, they dipped their hands into pouches slung over their shoulders and came up with golf-sized lead balls. With a practiced wind-up of their overdeveloped shoulders and overlong arms, they whipped the balls at the group at big league fastball speeds. Quentin grabbed Alice's hand, and they cowered back behind a heavy tapestry, which caught one of the balls. The other one clipped a candlestick on the table and then spectacularly vaporized 4 wine glasses in a row.
Under other circumstances, that would actually have been cool.
Elliot touched his forehead where he'd been hit by a shard of glass. His fingers came away bloody.
Would somebody please kill those things? Please?
Seriously, this shit isn't even mythological. We need some unicorns, or something up in this piece.
Janet, do your demon.
I already did. I did it the night after graduation. I felt sorry for it.
Huddling behind the rough fabric of the tapestry, I watched a pair of legs stroll by unhurriedly. While the rest of them hunkered down, Penny strode confidently toward the 2 ball throwers as they wound up again, no expressions on their stiff monkey faces. He was gesturing fast with both hands and singing an incantation in a high, clear tenor. Calm and serious in the shifting candlelight, wearing just a t-shirt and jeans, he looked much less like a puffy wannabe than he used to. He looked like a hardened young battle mage. Was that how he'd looked to Alice? I wondered, the night she slept with him?
With one hand, Penny stopped a lead ball in midair, then a second. They hovered there unsupported for a moment like surprised hummingbirds before they recovered their weight and dropped to the floor. With the other hand, Penny lobbed back a fiery seed that grew and expanded like an unfurling parachute. The tapestries on either side of the hall blazed where the fireball brushed them. It engulfed the 2 monkeys, and when it dissipated, they were simply gone. And a 10-foot section of the banquet table was a roaring bonfire.
Yeah. Boom, bitches.
Amateur.
If my hairline is messed up, I will bring those things back to life and kill them all over again.
They retreated along the banquet hall in the opposite direction, awkwardly shuffling past the straight-backed wooden chairs. The hall was The Magicians, cast by Our Tale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Just too narrow with the table in the center, there wasn't enough room for them to form up properly. The setup had a zany Scooby-Doo feeling. Quentin took a running step and half-leaped, half-slid across the banquet table, clearing dishes as he went, feeling like an action hero sliding across the Firebird emblazoned hood of his muscle car. A curious Alice in Wonderland menagerie was crowding into the hall from either side. As military order broke down in the room, so did taxonomical order. Species and body parts were mashed up seemingly at random. Had everything collapsed after the Chatwins left? To the point where humans and animals interbred? There were ferrets and rabbits, giant mice and loping monkeys and a vicious-looking fisher. But there were also men and women with the heads of animals, an astute-looking fox-headed man who appeared to be preparing a spell, a woman with a thick-necked lizard head with huge, independent eyes, an oddly dignified pike-bearer upon whose shoulders swayed the sinuous neck and tiny head of a pink flamingo. Fen plucked a sharp knife off the banquet table, gripped the blade carefully between her thumb and forefinger, and threw it spinning so that it took the foxman point first in the eye socket.
Move, everybody. Fall back. Don't let them bog us down. We have to be close now.
They fell back along the length of the banquet hall. The basic idea was to try to keep a coherent line of scrimmage between them and their attackers, but the line kept getting disrupted. One of their party would get hung up, the chairs kept getting in the way, or the tomb dwellers would group together and make a charge, or worse, one of them would blunder in from the side through a hidden door straight into the center of their party. He and Alice managed to hold hands for the first 10 seconds, but after that, it just wasn't possible. This wasn't like the earlier fights. The whole thing kept degenerating into the running of the bulls. The hall seemed to go on forever. Possibly it did. The candles and mirrors and food gave the whole scene an incongruously festive air, even if they decided to take the button home. At this point, it would be hard to muster everybody in one place to actually do it.
He felt like he had in gym class, trying to look like part of the team while at the same time desperately hoping nobody would pass him the ball.
Quentin jogged along with his knife out, though he didn't know if he was capable of using it. A giant house cat popped out from behind a tapestry right in front of him, and Fen almost certainly saved Quentin's life by cannoning fearlessly into the thing so that they rolled together on the floor, grappling and thrashing, until she knocked it out with a furious Inkaga headbutt. Quentin gave her a hand up, and they ran on. Dint was putting on a show. He'd hopped spryly up onto the banquet table and was striding along it, rapping out percussive syllables with astonishing speed and fluency. His wand tucked back behind his ear. His long black hair crackled and crazy energies flashed out from the tips of his long fingers. Sometimes he actually had 2 different spells going simultaneously. Quentin noticed, a primary attack in one hand and a second, lesser piece of witchery simmering in his offhand. At one point he made his arms swell up hugely, picked up 2 chairs in each giant hand and clubbed down a half-dozen opponents with them in 3 businesslike swings left, right, left. Penny managed to persuade a section of the table to rear up like an angry centipede and attack the Thalorians until they chopped it to pieces. Even Quentin got off a couple of sweaty-palmed magic missiles into the press. Fen's tunic was soaked with sweat. She closed her eyes and placed her palms together, whispering, and when she parted them, they gleamed with a terrible white phosphorescence. The next foe she met, a sinewy scimitar wielder who was either wearing a leopard skin or was half leopard from the waist up, she shouted and punched her fist through its chest up to her shoulder. But the close calls were getting closer. The situation was disintegrating, and they needed an exit strategy. The corridor was filling with bodies and smoke.
Quentin's breath whistled through his teeth, and in his head he was singing a psychotic nonsense song. Somewhere along the line, Quentin left his knife in a furry Philorian stomach. He never saw the creature's face. It was a creature, not a person, not a person, not a person, but later he would remember the sensation of jamming it in, how the blade punched through the tough rubbery muscles of the diaphragm and then slid easily into the underlying viscera, and how the muscles gripped the blade after it was in. He snatched his hand away from the hilt, like it was electrified.
Quentin registered first Josh, then Elliot, hunching their shoulders and letting loose their cargo demons. Elliot's was particularly awesome looking, banded from head to foot in horizontal yellow and black danger stripes. It slid sideways across the smooth table, scrabbling like a flung cat, then charged into the fray with unself-conscious glee, clinging and tearing and leaping and clinging again.
God. What else? What the fuck else?
This is bullshit. Side door. Pick a side door and go through it.
There was a moment of premonitory silence, as if some of the creatures actually sensed what was going to happen next. Then the floor jolted, and a giant man made of glowing red-hot iron shouldered his way sideways through the wall. He took the whole wall down with him. A flying brick nicked Fenn's head, and she dropped like she'd been shot. Waves of heat poured off the giant, warping the air around him, and anything he touched burned. He stood bent over, hands on the floor. He was about a third again too tall for the confined space of the banquet hall. His eyes were molten gold, with no pupils. Dust filled the air. The giant put his foot on Fenn's prostrate body, and she burst into flames. Everybody ran. Anybody who fell was trampled. The heat coming off the man's smooth red skin was unbearable. Quentin would have done anything to put distance between it and himself. There were pileups at the nearest exits. Quentin pushed past them and farther down the hall. He looked around for Alice and couldn't even find anybody human until he risked a look back and saw Josh standing in the middle of the hallway all alone. He seemed to be undergoing one of his freakish power surges. He'd summoned another of his miniature black holes, the way he'd done that day on the Welter's pitch. It had nearly swallowed a tree that day. Now, as Quentin watched, an entire length of tapestry wavered toward it and then flowed into it all at once, ripping free of its curtain rod with a sound like a fusillade of pistol shots. The light in the hall dimmed and became amber. The red giant was momentarily stalled by this. He was squatting down, studying the apparition, apparently fascinated by it. He was bald, and his expression was blank. His huge, hairless, glowing red cock and balls swung loose between his thighs like the clapper of a bell. Then Quentin was alone and running along a cool, dark-side corridor. It was silent. The noise switched off like a TV. He was sprinting flat out, and then he was running, then jogging, and then after a while he was just walking. It was over. He couldn't run anymore. The air scorched his lungs. He bent over and put his hands on his knees.
Worried his back itched painfully behind his right shoulder, and when he reached back to scratch, he found an arrow dangling from the hump of muscle there. Unthinkingly, he pulled it out, and a freshet of blood trickled down his back, but there wasn't much pain. It had only gone in an inch, probably not even that far. He was almost glad it hurt. The pain was something to hang on to. He held the wooden shaft, grateful to have something solid in his hands. The silence was amazing. He was safe again. For a few minutes he allowed himself to luxuriate in the simple joys of breathing cool air, of not running, of being alone in the semi-darkness and not in immediate danger of dying. But the gravity of the situation kept seeping through, messily, until he could no longer blot it up. He could be the last one alive for all he knew. He had no idea how to get back up to the surface. He could die down here. He felt the weight of the dirt and rock over his head. He was buried alive. Even if he made it out, he didn't have the button. He had no way to get back to Earth.
Footsteps in the darkness. Somebody was coming, walking. The figure's hands were glowing with a light charm. Warily, Quentin started in on yet another magic missile spell. But before he could finish, he realized it was just Elliot. He let his hands drop and sagged to the floor. Neither of them spoke. They just leaned together against the wall, side by side. The cold stone soothed the little divot of pain the arrow had punched in Quentin's back. Elliot's shirt was untucked. His face was all smudged with soot on one side. He would have been furious if he'd known. Elliot nodded.
Ben's dead.
Elliot took a deep breath and ran his glowing hands through his thick, wavy hair.
I know. I saw. Thoughtful, I don't think there's anything we could have done. Big Red back there was just out of our league. That's all.
They fell silent. It was like the words had spun off into some void where they had no meaning. They'd lost any connection with the world, or maybe it was the world that had peeled away from the words. Elliot passed him a flask with something strong in it, and he drank and passed it back. It seemed to restore some link between him and his body. Quentin drew his knees up and hugged them.
I got hit by an arrow. It felt like a stupid thing to say. In my back.
Thoughtful, we should go.
Right.
Thoughtful, backtrack. Try to meet back up with the others. Penny's got the button.
Thoughtful, it was amazing that Elliot could still be so practical after everything that had happened. He was so much stronger than Quentin was. Worried, that big glowing guy though.
Thoughtful.
Worried, maybe he's still back there.
Elliot shrugged.
Thoughtful? We have to get to the button.
Quentin was thirsty, but there was no water. He couldn't remember when he dropped his pack.
Thoughtful, I'll tell you something funny. I think Anini's hooked up with Dint.
What? What? When did they even have time?
Thoughtful bathroom break. After that second fight.
Wow. Tough break for Josh, but you have to applaud their initiative.
Definitely. But hard cheese on Josh.
Hard cheese.
It was the kind of thing they used to say back at Brakebills.
I'll tell you something else funny. I don't regret coming here. Even now that it's all gone to shit, I'm still glad I came. Could that possibly be the stupidest thing I've ever said to you? But it's the truth. I think I was going to drink myself to death back on Earth.
It was true. For Elliot, there hadn't been any other way. Somehow that made it a little bit better. You could still drink yourself to death here.
At this rate, I won't have the chance.
Quentin stood up. His legs were stiff and achy. He did a deep knee bend. They started back the way they came.
Worried, Quentin didn't feel any fear anymore. That part of it was over, except that he was worried about Alice. The adrenaline was gone too. Now he was just thirsty, and his feet hurt, and he was covered in scratches he couldn't remember having gotten. The blood on his back had dried, sticking his shirt to the arrow wound. It tugged uncomfortably every time he took a step.
Worried, it became apparent pretty soon that he didn't have anything to worry about anyway, because they couldn't even find their way back to the banquet hall. They must have taken a wrong turn somewhere, maybe several. They stopped and tried some basic pathfinding magic, but Quentin's tongue felt thick and clumsy, and neither of them could seem to get the words quite right. And anyway, they really needed a dish of olive oil to make it work properly.
Quentin couldn't think of anything to say. He waited while Elliot took a piss against the stone wall. It felt like they'd come to the end, but they had no choice but to keep walking. Maybe this is still part of the story, he thought numbly. The bad part, right before everything comes out all right. He wondered what time it was on the surface. He felt like he'd been up all night.
The masonry of the walls was older now, crumblier. For short stretches, it was just dusty, unworked cave rock. They were at the very outer fringes of this subterranean universe, wandering among badly eroded planets and dim, decaying stars. The hallway had ceased to branch now. It contented itself with curving gently to the left, and Quentin thought he could feel the curve getting gradually tighter, like it was spiraling inward, like the interior corridors of a nautilus shell. He figured it stood to reason, what little reason was left in the world, that there was a geometrical limit to how far it could keep curving in on itself before they came to something. Pretty soon it turned out he was right. The ram. Just like that, there they all were. Quentin and Elliot stood at the edge of a large, round underground chamber, blinking at bright torchlight. It was different from the rooms they'd already seen in that it appeared to be naturally occurring. The floor was sandy, the ceiling craggy and irregular and unworked, with stalactites and other rocky excrescences poking down that you wouldn't want to hit your head on. The air was chilly and damp and still. Quentin could hear an underground stream gurgling somewhere. He couldn't see where. The sound had no origin or direction. The others were here too, all of them except for poor Fen. Josh and Alice were in an entrance a little ways over. Janet stood in another archway looking lost and bedraggled. Dinton and Nyes were in the next one over, and Penny was alone in the one after that. They stood in the doorways like contestants framed in the spangled, light-bulbed archways of a game show. It was a miracle. It even looked like they'd all just arrived at the exact same moment.
Quentin took a deep breath. Relief flooded through him like a warm liquid transfusion. He was just so fucking glad to see every last one of them. Even Dint, good old Dint, you hound dog. Even Penny, and only partly because he still had his pack, presumably with the button still inside. The story's outcome was still in play after all. Even after everything that had gone wrong, it could still all turn out basically okay. It was a disaster, but a mitigated disaster. It was still possible that 5 years from now, when they were more or less over their post-traumatic stress disorder, they'd all get a big kick out of getting together and talking about it. Maybe the real Philly Rye wasn't that different from the Fillery he'd always wanted after all. Kings and queens, Quentin thought. Kings and queens. Glory has its price. Did you not know that?
A block of stone stood in the center of the room. On it was a large shaggy sheep, or no, it had horns, so that made it a ram. It lay with its eyes closed, its legs folded under it, its chin resting on a crown. a simple golden circlet snuggled between its two shaggy front knees. Quentin wasn't sure if it was asleep or dead or just a very lifelike statue. He took a tentative, exploratory step into the room, feeling like a man setting foot on shore after a long and grievous afternoon on a storm-tossed yacht. The sandy floor felt reassuringly solid.
I didn't know. I wasn't sure if you were still alive or not.
Josh thought Quentin was talking to him. His comical face was ashen. He looked like a ghost seeing a ghost.
I know. He coughed wetly into his fist.
What the hell happened? Did you fight that thing?
Sort of. I felt the big spell coming on, so I just went with it. I think I finally felt what you guys feel. I called up one of those swirly black holes. He looked at it. Then he looked at me with those freaky gold eyes. Then it just sucked him in, head first. Just ate him. I saw his big red legs sticking out, kicking, and I just booked it out of there. Did you check out his dick, though? That guy was hung.
Quentin and Alice embraced without speaking. The others made their way over. Stories were exchanged. It was a reunion. Somehow everybody had managed to make it out of the banquet hall unscathed, or at least not too badly scathed. Anais showed everybody where her golden curls got crisped off in the back as she ran. Janet was the only one who hadn't escaped out a side door. Instead, she ran all the way to the end of the hall, which it turned out did have an end after all, though it took her an hour to get there. 3 years of cross-country, she said proudly. She'd even had a glass of the wine with no ill effects, apart from mild intoxication.
They all shook their heads. What they'd all been through. Nobody would ever believe it. Quentin was so tired he could hardly think, except to think. We did it. We really did it. Elliot passed the flask, and everybody drank. It had been a game at first, and then it all got horribly real, but now it was starting to feel like a game again. Something like what they'd been imagining on that terrible, wonderful morning. Back in Manhattan. Good fun. A real adventure. After a while, they ran out of things to say. Just stood in a circle looking at each other and shaking their heads with silly, punch-drunk smiles on their faces.
Thoughtful. Welcome.
It was the ram. He had opened his eyes.
Welcome, children of Earth. Welcome to you valiant child of Fillory. I am Ember.
He was sitting up. He had the strange horizontal peanut-shaped pupils that sheep have. His thick wool was the color of pale gold. His ears stuck out comically beneath the heavy horns that curled back magnificently from his forehead. Of them all, only Penny knew what to do. He dropped his backpack and walked over to stand in front of the ram. He got down on his knees in the sand and bowed his head.
We sought a crown, but we have found a king. My Lord Ember, it is my honor and privilege to offer you my fealty. Thank you, my child.
The ram's eyes half closed gravely and joyfully.
Thank God, was all Quentin could think. Literally, thank God. It was really him. It was the only explanation. It wasn't like they'd done anything especially heroic to deserve this reversal of fortune. Ember must have brought them here. He had saved them. This was it, the closing credits. They'd won. The coronation could begin. He looked from Penny to the ram and back. He could hear feet shuffling on the sandy floor. Somebody else besides Penny was kneeling. Quentin didn't turn to see who. He stayed standing. For some reason he wasn't ready to kneel down. Not yet. He would in a minute, but somehow this didn't feel like the moment. Though it would have been nice, he'd been walking for so long. He wasn't sure what to do with his hands, so he clasped them together over his crotch.
Ember was talking, but Quentin's mind glossed over the words. They had a certain boilerplate quality. He'd always skipped over Ember's and Umber's speeches in the books, too. Come to think of it, if this was Ember, where was Umber? Normally, you never saw them apart.
It is time we resumed our rightful stewardship over this land. Together we shall go forth from this place and restore glory to Fillory, the glory of the old days, the great days.
Thoughtful. The words washed over him. Alice could fill him in later. In the books, Ember and Umber had always come off as slightly sinister, But in person, Ember didn't seem that bad at all. He was nice, even warm. Quentin could see why the Felorians didn't mind him that much. He was like a kindly, crinkly-eyed department store Santa. You didn't take him too seriously. He didn't look any different from an ordinary ram except that he was larger and better groomed, and he gave off more of an air of alert, alien intelligence than you would expect from your average sheep. The effect was unexpectedly funny. Worried, Quentin found it hard to focus on what Ember was saying. He was drunk on exhaustion and relief and Elliot's flask. He would be happy to stipulate to any big speeches. He just wished he knew where that tantalizing, tinkling, trickling sound was coming from, because he was perishing of thirst. There was the crown right there, between Ember's hooves. Should somebody ask for it, or would he just give it to them when he was ready? It was ridiculous, like a question of dinner party etiquette. But he supposed the ram would give it to Penny now, as a reward for his prompt display of sycophancy, and they'd all have to be his underlings. Maybe that was all it took. Quentin didn't particularly want to see Penny crowned as High King of Fillory. After all this, was Penny going to turn out to be the hero of this little adventure? I have a question.
A voice interrupted the old ram midstream. Quentin was surprised to find that it was his own. Ember paused. He was quite a large animal, easily 5 feet at the withers. His lips were black, and his wool looked pleasantly soft and cloud-like. Quentin would have liked to bury his face in that wool, to weep in it, and then fall asleep in it. Penny craned his neck around and bulged his eyes warningly at Quentin.
I don't mean to sound overly inquisitive, but if you're, Ember, how come you're down here in this dungeon and not up there on the surface helping your people?
And for a penny. It wasn't that he wanted to make a huge point about it. He just wanted to know why they'd all had to go through so much. He wanted to square it away before they went any further.
Worried, I mean, and this is already coming out more dramatically than I meant it to. You are a god and things are really falling apart up there. I mean, I think a lot of people are wondering where you've been all this time. That's all. Why would you let your people suffer like that?
Was it worked better with the big ballsy shit-eating grin attached to it, but instead it was coming out shivery and a little teary. He was saying, I mean too much. But he wasn't backing down. Ember made an odd, nonverbal bleating sound. His mouth worked more sideways than a human mouth would. Quentin could see his thick, stiff, pink ram's tongue.
Show some respect.
But Ember raised one black hoof.
We should not have to remind you, human child, that we are not your servant. It is not your needs that we serve, but our own. We do not come and go at your whim. It is true, we have been here under the earth for some time. It is difficult to know how long. This far from the sun and his travels, but some months at least. Evil has come to Fillory, and evil must be fought, and there is no fighting without cost. We have suffered, as you see, an embarrassment to our hindquarters.
He turned his long, golden head half a degree. Quentin now saw that one of the ram's hind legs was in fact lame. Ember held it stiffly so that the hoof only just brushed the stone. It wouldn't take his weight.
Well, but I don't understand. Quentin's right. You're the god of this world? Or one of them. Doesn't that make you basically all-powerful?
Thoughtful there are higher laws that are past your understanding, daughter. The power to create order is one thing. The power to destroy is another. Always there in balance. But it is easier to destroy than to create. And there are those whose nature it is to love destruction.
Well, but why would you create something that had the power to hurt you or any of your creatures? Why don't you help us? Do you have any idea how much we hurt? How much we suffer?
A stern glance.
I know all things, daughter.
Well, okay, then know this. We human beings are unhappy all the time. We hate ourselves and we hate each other. And sometimes we wish you or whoever had never created us, or this shit-ass world, or any other shit-ass world. Do you realize that? So next time you might think about not doing such a half-assed job.
A ringing silence followed her outburst. The torches guttered against the walls. They'd left streaks of black soot all the way up to the domed ceiling. It was true, what she was saying. It made him angry. But there was something about it that made him nervous, too.
You are incensed, daughter.
I'm not your daughter. And yeah, no shit, I'm incensed.
The great old ram sighed deeply. A tear formed in his great liquid eye, spilled over, and was absorbed into the golden wool on his cheek. In spite of himself, Quentin thought of the proud Indian and the old anti-littering commercials.
Dude, she made Ember cry.
The tide of evil is at the full. But now that you have come, the tide will turn.
But it wouldn't. Suddenly, Quentin knew it. It all came to him in one sick flash. You're here against your will. You're a prisoner down here, aren't you?
This wasn't over after all.
Human, there is so much you do not understand. You are still but a child.
That's it, isn't it? That's why you're down here? Somebody put you down here, and you can't get out. This wasn't a quest. This was a rescue mission.
Next to him, Alice had both her hands over her mouth.
Where's Umber? Where's your brother? Where is...
Nobody moved. The ram's long muzzle and black lips were still and unreadable.
Thoughtful. It is possible.
Umber's dead, isn't he? This place isn't a tomb, it's a prison.
Or a trap.
Human children, listen to me. There are laws that go far beyond anything in your understanding.
I've heard pretty much enough about my understanding.
But who did it? Who even has the muscle to do this to Ember? And why? I suppose it was the Watcher woman, but this is all very odd.
Quentin felt a prickling in his shoulders. He looked around at the dark corners of the cave they were in. It wouldn't be long before whatever had broken Ember's leg turned up, and they would have to fight again. He didn't know if he could take another fight. Penny was still on his knees, but the back of his neck as he looked up at Ember was flushed crimson.
Maybe it's time to hit the old panic button. Back to the Netherlands.
Thoughtful, I have a better idea. Thoughtful, they had to get control of the situation. They could quit now, but the crown was right there, right in front of them. They were so close. They were almost home. They could still win it all if they could just figure out a way to push through to the end of the story. If they could gut it out through one more scene. And he realized he knew how.
Penny had dropped his pack on the sandy floor. Quentin bent down and rummaged through it. Of course Penny had webbed and bunged the fucking thing to within an inch of its life, but in among the power bars and the Leatherman and the spare tidy whiteys wrapped in a red bandana, he found what he was looking for. The horn was smaller than he remembered it.
Right? Remember what the nymph said? When all hope is lost. Or something like that?
I wouldn't say all hope is lost.
Let me see that.
He had been conspicuously silent since Ember woke up. Anais clung to his arm. Quentin ignored him. Everybody was talking at once. Penny and the ram were locked in some kind of intense lover's quarrel.
In thoughtful, interesting, it might work. I'd rather try that than go back to the city. Who do you think will come?
Human child. Human child.
Go for it, Q. It's time. Go for it.
Alice just nodded gravely. The silver mouthpiece tasted metallic against his lips, like a nickel or a battery. The breath he took was so deep that pain lanced hotly into his arrow-stuck shoulder as his ribs expanded. He wasn't sure exactly what to do, purse his lips like a trumpeter or just blow into it like a kazoo. But the ivory horn produced a clear, even high note as gentle and round as a French horn winded by a seasoned symphony player in a concert hall. Everybody stopped talking and turned to look at him. It wasn't loud exactly, but it made everything else quiet around it, so that it was instantly the only sound in the room, and everything resonated with its pure, simple strength. It was natural and perfect, a single note that sounded like a grand chord. It went on and on. He blew until his lungs were empty. The sound echoed and faded away, gone as if it had never been. The cavern was still. For a moment, Quentin felt ridiculous, like he'd just blown a noisemaker. What was he expecting anyway? He really didn't know. There was a snuffling sound from Ember's pedestal.
Oh, child, don't you know what you have done?
I just got us out of this mess. That's what I've done.
The ram drew himself up.
I am sorry you came here, children of Earth. No one asked you to come. I am sorry that our world is not the paradise you were looking for, but it was not created for your entertainment. Fillory is not a theme park for you and your friends to play dress-up in, with swords and crowns.
He was visibly mastering some powerful emotion. It took Quentin a moment to recognize it. It was fear. The old ram was choking on it. That's not why we came here, Ember.
Is it not? No, of course it is not. You came here to save us. You came here to be our king. But tell me something, Quentin. How could you hope to save us when you cannot even save yourself?
Quentin was spared the necessity of answering because that was when the catastrophe began. A small man in a neat gray suit appeared in the cave. His face was obscured by a leafy branch that hung in front of it in midair. He looked exactly the way Quentin remembered. The same suit, the same club tie. His face was no less illegible. He held his pink, manicured hands clasped urbanely in front of him. It was as if Quentin had never left the classroom where he first appeared.
In a way he supposed he never had. The terror was so absolute, so all-encompassing, that it was almost like calm, not a suspicion, but the absolute certainty that they were all about to die.
Ember roared. The sound was colossal. It shook the room and a stalactite fell and shattered. The inside of Ember's mouth was mottled pink and black. At that moment, the ram no longer looked quite so ridiculous. There were great humps of muscle under all that fluffy wool like boulders under moss, and his ribbed horns were thick and stony. They curled all the way around so that the two sharp tips pointed forward. Head down, he surged down off the stone plinth at the man in the gray suit. The beast slapped him aside with a smooth, unhurried backhand motion. The gesture was almost casual. Ember shot sideways like a rocket and hit the rock wall with a sickening, boneless smack. The physics of it looked wrong, as if the ram were as light as a leaf and the beast as dense as dwarf star matter. Ember dropped motionless to the sandy floor. He lay where he fell. The beast flicked woolly fluff off one immaculate gray sleeve with the backs of his fingers.
Thoughtful. It's a funny thing about the old gods. You think that just because they're old, they must be difficult to kill. But when the fighting starts, they go down just like anybody else. They aren't stronger, they're just older.
There was a sandy shuffling from behind Quentin. He risked a glance. Dint had turned on his heel and walked out of the room. The beast did nothing to stop him. Quentin suspected the rest of them wouldn't get off that easily.
Thoughtful, yes, he was one of mine. Farvel was, too, if you want to know the whole truth. The birch tree, you remember him. They mostly are. The ram's time is over. Fillory is my world now.
Fucking Dint. And I pretended to like his stupid vest.
I knew you'd come for me. It's hardly a surprise. I've been waiting for you for ages. But is this really all of you? It's a bad joke, you know. You've no chance at all. I suppose I won't be needing this anymore. I'd almost gotten used to it.
Almost absent-mindedly, the beast plucked the branch that hung in front of his face with a thumb and forefinger, as if he were taking off a pair of sunglasses, and tossed it lightly aside. Quentin cringed. He didn't want to see its real face, but it was too late. And it turned out he had nothing to worry about because it was an utterly ordinary face. It could have been the face of an insurance adjuster. Round, mild, soft-chinned, boyish.
Nothing? You don't recognize me?
The beast strode over to the stone plinth, picked up the crown that still lay there, and placed it on his graying temples.
My God, you're Martin Chatwin?
In the flesh. And my, how I've grown.
I don't understand. How can you be Martin Chatwin?
But surely you knew? Isn't that why you're here? Well, I don't suppose it matters, but I would have thought that was the whole point. It's a little insulting, really.
He pouted for show, a sad clown. It was disturbing to see a middle-aged man with the mannerisms of a little English schoolboy. It really was him. He hadn't grown up at all. He even had a curiously miniature, asexual quality, as if he'd stopped growing the moment he'd run away into that forest. What happened to you?
What happened? Why, I got what I wanted. I went to Fillory and I never came back.
It was all becoming clear. Martin Chatwin hadn't been stolen by monsters. He had become one. He had found what Quentin thought he wanted, a way to stay in Fillory, to leave the real world behind forever. But the price had been high.
I wasn't going to go back to Earth after I'd seen Fillory. I mean, you can't show a man paradise and then snatch it back again. That's what gods do. But I say,
Down with gods. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you put your mind to it. I made some very interesting friends in the Darkling Woods. Very helpful chaps. Mind you, the kinds of things you have to do to work that kind of magic well. Your humanity is the first thing to go. You don't stay a man once you've done the things I've done. Once you know the things I know, I hardly miss it now.
Friends, you mean the Watcher Woman?
The Watcher Woman? Oh, my, that is amusing. Sometimes I forget what's in those books. I've been here a very long time, you know. I haven't read them in centuries. No, not the Watcher Woman. Goodness, the crowd I run with make her look like, well, they make her look like you. Amateurs. But enough chit-chat. Who's got the button?
The button was, of course, in Penny's bag, which lay right at Quentin's feet. I did this, he thought with a pang that ran all the way through him. This is twice I've summoned the beast. I'm a curse on everyone around me.
Button, who's got the button? Who's got it?
Penny began backing away from the thing in the gray suit, at the same time starting up a spell on other secret weapon, maybe. Quentin didn't recognize it, but Martin moved invisibly fast, like a poisonous fish striking. In a blur, he had both of Penny's wrists in the grip of one hand. Penny struggled wildly. He bent at the waist and kicked Martin in the stomach, then braced his legs against his chest and pushed to try to get free, grunting with the effort. The beast barely seemed to notice.
I'm afraid not, dear boy.
He opened his mouth wide, too wide, as if his jaw were unhinging like a snake's, and placed both of Penny's hands in his mouth. He bit them off at the wrists. It wasn't a clean bite. Martin Chatwin had blunt human teeth, not fangs, and it took an extra shake of his calm, middle-aged head to fully crush the wrist bones and detach Penny's hands. Then the beast dropped him, chewing busily, and Penny fell back on the sand. Arterial blood sprayed crazily from the stumps, then he rolled over and they were underneath him. His legs thrashed like he was being electrocuted. He didn't scream, but frantic snuffling noises came from where his face was pushed into the sandy floor. His sneakers scrabbled in the dirt. The beast swallowed once, twice, his Adam's apple bobbing. He grinned, almost embarrassed, holding up one finger while he chewed. Give me a moment. His eyes narrowed with pleasure.
Cheat.
They stared at him.
Why? What are you?
Martin took out his handkerchief and dabbed Penny's blood from the corner of his mouth.
Why? I'm what you thought that was. I'm a god.
Quentin's chest was so tight that he kept taking tense, irregular little breaths, in and out. But why do you want it?
Talking was good. Talking was better than killing.
I would have thought it was obvious. The buttons are the only things I know of that could force me to return to Earth. I've got almost all of them rounded up. Just one more after this. Goodness knows where the bunnies got them. I still haven't figured that out. Do you know, when I first ran away, they hunted me like an animal? My own siblings? They wanted to bring me home. Like an animal. Later, Ember and Umber came looking for me too to try to deport me, but by then it was much too late for that. Much too late. I was too strong even for them. That bloody cunt of a Watcher Woman is still at it, with her damned clock trees, mucking about with time. Even now their roots go halfway through this bloody world. She's next after you. She's still got a button, the last one. Once I've got hers, I really don't think there'll be any way to get rid of me at all.
Penny rolled over onto his side. He looked up at Quentin, his face strangely ecstatic, though paler than ever and covered in sand. His eyes were closed. He had the stumps of his wrists pressed tight against his chest. His shirt was wringing wet with blood.
Is it bad, Q? I'm not going to look. You tell me. How bad is it?
You're all right, man.
Martin could not suppress a joyless clubman's chuckle at that. He went on.
And strategies. I've been back once or twice, of course, by myself. Once to kill the old bugger, Clover. He earned that. That and more. I wish I had him to kill again. And I nipped through once when your Professor March bungled a spell. Just to keep an eye on things. I thought somebody at Brakebills might be planning something. I get a sort of sense of the future sometimes. It appears that I was right, though I must have eaten the wrong student.
Martin clapped his hands together and rubbed them in anticipation.
Well, that's all bygones. Let's have it.
We hid it again, like your sister Helen. We buried the button. Kill us, and you'll never find it.
My brave Alice. I brought this on us. His knees were trembling uncontrollably.
Oh, well played, my girl. Shall I start ripping people's heads off, one by one? I think you'll tell me before it comes to that.
Wait, why would you kill us at all? Fuck it, we'll just give you the button. Just leave us alone.
Oh, I wish I could do that, Quentin. I truly do. But you see, this place changes you. It's why the Rams didn't like humans staying here too long. As it is, I've almost gone too far. I've got quite a taste for human flesh now. Don't you go anywhere, William. Forms just don't have the same savor.
William, that must be Penny's real name. He never knew it before.
And you know I can't have you lot running around trying to overthrow me. Treason. That is. Everybody noticed that I've crippled your principal spellcaster. You got that?
You pathetic fucker. It wasn't even worth it, was it? That's the funny part. You came here for the same reason we did. And are you happy now? You found out, didn't you? There's no getting away from yourself, not even in Fillory.
Martin snarled and made an enormous bound forward, covering the 30 feet that separated them in a single leap. At the last second, Quentin turned to run, but the monster was already on his back, his teeth in Quentin's shoulder, his arms hugging Quentin's chest. The beast's jaws were like a huge, hungry pliers gripping his collarbone. It bent and cracked sickeningly. The jaws were gripped, getting a better hold on him. Quentin heard himself make an involuntary groan as the air was crushed out of his lungs.
He was so afraid of the pain, but when it came down to it, it wasn't so much the pain as the pressure, the incredible, unbearable pressure. He couldn't breathe. Quentin thought for an instant he might be able to manage some magic, maybe something grand and strange, like he had that first day at Brakebills. In his examination, but he couldn't speak to cast a spell. He reached back with his hands. Maybe he could find with his hands, maybe he could find Martin's eyes with his thumbs, or rip his ears. But all he could do was pull Martin's thin gray English hair. Martin's panting breath roared in Quentin's ear like a lover's. He still looked mostly human, but at this range he was pure animal, snuffling and growling and reeking of alien musk. Tears started from Quentin's eyes. It was all ending now. This was the big finale. Eaten alive by a Chatwin, for the sake of a button. It was almost funny. He'd always assumed he'd survive. But everybody assumes that, don't they? He thought it would all be so different. There must have been a better way. What had been his first mistake? There were so many.
But then the pressure was gone, and his ears were ringing. Alice had her pale fingers wrapped in a double fist around Janet's blue-black revolver. Her face was white, but her hands were steady. She fired 2 more shots broadside into Martin's ribs, then he turned to face her and she fired straight into his chest. Pulverized bits of the beast's suit and tie spun and floated in the air. Quentin thrashed forward, a primordial fish heaving itself up onto a sandy bank, sucking wind, anything to get away. Now the real pain was coming. His right arm was numb and dragging and not quite as firmly attached to him as he was used to. He tasted blood in his mouth. He heard Alice fire twice more. When he thought he was far enough away, he risked a look back. His peripheral vision was going gray around the edges. It was closing in a circle like the final moments of a Porky Pig cartoon. But he could see Alice and Martin Chatwin facing each other across 10 empty paces of sand, out of bullets. She tossed the revolver backhand back to Janet.
All right. Let's see what else your friends taught you.
Her voice sounded very small in the silent cave, but not afraid. Martin regarded her with bemused curiosity. He cocked his head at an angle. What was she thinking? Was she really going to try to fight him? 10 long, still seconds ticked by. When he rushed her, Alice was ready. She was the only one. There was no warning. He went at her from a standing start. First, he was still. Then he was a blur. Quentin didn't know how she could react so fast. When he could barely track Martin's movements, but before the beast was even halfway to her, she had him up in the air, his legs churning pathetically, gripped in an iron kinetic spell. She slammed him to the ground so hard he bounced. He was on his feet again almost at once, smoothing out his suit, and he came at her again without even seeming to set himself. This time she stepped to one side like a matador, and he blew past her. Alice was moving like the beast now. She must have sped up her own reaction time, the way Penny had with the arrow. With a massive effort, Quentin pushed himself up till he was half sitting. Then something gave in his chest and he collapsed back down again.
Are you following this? You didn't see it coming, did you? And this is just straight Flemish praxis. Nothing else. I haven't even gotten to any Eastern material yet.
With a crack, the beast snapped off a stalagmite at the base and whipped its sidearm at Alice, but the stone spear burst in midair before it reached her. Fragments whined away in all directions. Quentin wasn't tracking it all, but he didn't think she'd done that. The others must be backing her up, a phalanx with Alice at the head.
Though Alice was way ahead of them, maybe poor Penny could have followed what she was doing, but Alice was in a place Quentin hadn't known she could go. He was a magician, but she was something else, a true adept. He had no idea she was so far beyond him. There was a time when he might have felt envious of her, but now he felt only pride. That was his Alice.
Sand rushed hissing from the floor in a shroud like a swarm of enraged bees and wrapped itself around Martin's head, trying to penetrate his mouth and nose and ears. He twisted and flailed his arms frantically.
Oh, Martin. That's the trouble with monsters. No theoretical rigor. No one ever made you iron out your fundamentals, did they? If they had, you certainly wouldn't fall for this.
In his blinded state, Martin walked straight into a fireball a la Penny that burst over him. But Alice didn't wait. She couldn't afford to. Her lips never stopped moving and her hands never stopped their fluid, unhurried motions, one spell rolling right over into the next. It was high-stakes blitz chess. The fireball was followed by a glimmering spherical prison, then by a toxic hail of magic missiles. She must have taken apart that spell and supercharged it so that it yielded a whole flock of them. The sand she'd whipped up from the floor gathered and fused into a faceless glass golem, which landed 2 jabs and a roundhouse punch before Martin shattered it with a counterpunch. But he seemed disoriented. His round English face was an ominous flustered red. A colossal crushing weight seemed to settle on his shoulders, some kind of invisible yoke that took him down to one knee. An eyes projected an ochre lightning strike at Martin that left behind a bloodshot after image on Quentin's retinas, and Elliot and Josh and Janet had joined hands and were sending a hail of rocks that beat on his back. The room was full of a babble of incantations, but Martin didn't seem to notice. Alice was the only one he saw. From a half-crouch, he lunged at her across the sand, and some kind of phantasmal armor materialized around her, like nothing Quentin had ever seen before. Silvery and translucent, it flickered in and out of visibility. The beast's fingers slid off it. The armor came with a shimmery polearm that Alice spun in one hand, then set and thrust at Martin's stomach. Sparks flew between them.
Phoebus's spectral armory. Like it? Do you? Very basic principles. Second-year stuff. But then you never bothered with school, did you, Martin? You wouldn't have lasted an hour at Brakebills.
Seeing her fight alone like this was intolerable. Quentin lifted his cheek from the sandy floor and tried to speak a spell, anything, even to create a distraction, but his lips wouldn't shape words. His fingers were going numb. He beat his hands against the ground in frustration. He had never loved Alice more. He felt like he was sending her his strength, even though he knew she couldn't feel it.
Alice and Martin sparred savagely for a solid minute. The armor spell must have come with a bonus of martial arts savvy, because Alice whipped her fairy glaive around in a complicated pattern, two-handed now. It had a small, vicious spike on its butt end that drew blood. Sweat matted her hair to her forehead, but she never lost focus. After another minute, the armor vanished. The spell must have expired, and she did something that froze the air around the beast into an intricate frostwork mummy. Even his clothes froze and fell to pieces in shards, leaving him naked and fishbelly white. But by then he was close enough to seize her arm. Suddenly she was a girl again, small and vulnerable. But not for long. She spat out a ferocious sequence of syllables and transformed into a tawny lioness with a white scruff of beard under her chin. She and Martin went down grappling, mouths gaping, trying to get their teeth into each other. Alice worked with her huge back legs to scratch and disembowel, caterwauling angrily. Janet was circling the fight, trying to cram bullets into the revolver and dropping them freely on the sand, but there was nowhere to aim anyway. They were all tangled up together. The next moment, the beast was in the coils of a massive spotted anaconda. Then Alice was an eagle, then a huge brindled bear, then a horrific man-sized scorpion with pincing legs and its venomous sting, the size of a crane hook, lodged in Martin Chatwin's back. Light flashed and crackled around them as they fought, and their struggling bodies rose from the ground. The beast was on top of her, and Alice expanded hugely to become a limber, sinuous white dragon on its back, her enormous wings slapping the sand and sending everybody scrambling. The beast grew with her, so that she was wrestling a giant. She gripped him in her talons and screamed a torrent of blue fire like jet exhaust straight into his face. For a minute, he writhed in Alice's grip. His eyebrows were gone, and his face was comically blackened. Quentin could hear the Alice dragon panting raggedly. The beast shuddered and was still for a moment. Then he appeared to compose himself, and he punched Alice once, hard, in the face. Instantly, she was human again. Her nose was bleeding. Martin rolled neatly to one side and got to his feet. Naked though he was, he produced a clean handkerchief from somewhere and used it to dab some of the soot from his face.
Damn it. Somebody do something. Help her.
Janet got one last bullet in and fired. Then she threw the pistol overhand. It bounced off the back of Martin Chatwin's head without mussing his hair.
Fuck you.
Martin took a step toward Alice. No. This had to end.
Hey, asshole. You forgot one thing.
He spat blood and switched to his best Cubano accent, his voice cracking hysterically.
Say hello to my Leo friend.
Quentin whispered the catchword Fogg had given him the night of graduation. He'd imagined it in his head 100 times, and now as he pronounced the final syllable, something big and hard was struggling and thrashing under his shirt, scrabbling at the skin of his back.
Looking up at it, Quentin noticed that his Kokoda was wearing a little pair of round spectacles hooked over its pointy ears. What the fuck, his Kokoda had glasses? It stood over him, uncertain, looking learned and thoughtful. It didn't know whom to fight.
The naked guy. Go! Save the girl! The demon skidded to a stop 10 feet from its prey. It feinted left, then left again, like it was playing one-on-one with Martin, trying to break his ankles before it gathered itself and sprang directly for his face. Warily, as if to express to them the unfairness of the trouble they were putting him through, Martin put up a hand to catch it in flight. The demon tore at his fingers, hissing. Martin began slowly stuffing it into his mouth, like a gecko eating a spider, while it pulled his hair and gouged at his eyes. Quentin waved at Alice frantically to run. Maybe if they all split up. But she wasn't looking at him. She licked her lips and tucked her hair behind her ears with both hands. She got to her feet. Something had changed in her face. She had made a decision. She began to work with her hands, the preliminaries to something very advanced. At the sound, both Martin and the Cacodoman looked at her. Martin took the opportunity to break the demon's neck and push the rest of its body into his mouth.
So you think you're the biggest monster in this room?
Don't.
But Alice didn't stop. She was trying something. Everybody seemed to get it except Quentin.
No, no, no. Wait.
You're not even a magician at all, are you, Martin? You're just a little boy. That's all you are. That's all you ever were. Well, I'm sorry.
She closed her eyes and began to recite. Quentin could see it all in Alice's face. Everything they'd been through, everything they'd done to each other, everything they'd gotten past. She was letting it all come out. It was a big spell, Renaissance, very academic magic. Big energies. He couldn't imagine what good it would do, but a moment later he realized the spell wasn't the point. The side effects were the point. He began scratching his way toward her, anything he could do to get closer. He didn't care if it killed him.
No! No!
The blue fire began in her fingertips and spread inexorably through her hands and upper wrists. It lit up her face. Alice opened her eyes again. She regarded it with fascination.
I'm on fire. I didn't think I'm burning.
And then, in a rising shriek that could have been agony or could have been ecstasy.
I'm burning. God. Quentin, I'm burning. It's burning me.
Martin halted his slow advance to observe as Alice became a niffin. Quentin couldn't see his expression. Alice took a step backward and sat down, still staring at her arms. They were now blue fire up to the shoulders. They were like two highway flares. Her flesh was not consumed, but strangely replaced by the fire that was chewing through it. She stopped speaking, just moaned on an ever higher, ever louder note. Finally, as the blue fire rose up her neck, she threw back her head and opened her mouth wide. But no more sound came out. The fire left behind it a new Alice, one that was smaller and made of something like blue glowing glass. Fresh and hot from the furnace, the process flooded the cavern with blue light. Even before the transformation was complete, Alice had left the ground. She was pure fire now, her face full of that special madness belonging to things that are neither living nor dead. She floated above the floor as easily as if she were floating in a swimming pool.
The spirit that had replaced Alice, the Niffin, regarded them neutrally with furious, insane, empty sapphire eyes. For all her power, she looked delicate, like she was blown from Murano glass. From where he lay, Quentin watched with detached academic interest through a red haze of agony. The capacity for terror or love or grief or anything but pain had gone along with his peripheral vision. She was not Alice. She was a righteous, destroying angel. She was blue and nude and wore an expression of irrepressible hilarity.
Quentin had stopped breathing. For a moment, Alice hovered before the beast, incandescent with anticipation. At the last instant, he appeared to sense that the odds had shifted and began a step backward. Then he bolted in a blur. But even then, he was too slow. The angel had him by his gray, conservatively cut hair. Bracing her other hand on his shoulder, she tore Martin Chatwin's head off his neck with a crisp, dry ripping sound. All of this action had become too exhausting for Quentin to watch. He clung to it like a faltering radio signal, but it was so hard to maintain clear reception. He rolled languorously over onto his back.
His mind had become a loopy parody of itself, stretched thin as taffy, translucent as cellophane. Something unspeakable had happened, but he couldn't keep hold of it. Somehow the world as he knew it was no longer there. He'd managed to find a reasonably soft, sandy patch of floor to recline on. It was thoughtful of Martin, really, to have brought them to a room where the sand was so deliciously fine and cool. Although it was a shame that this clean white sand was now almost entirely saturated with blood, his and Penny's. He wondered if Penny was still alive. He wondered if it would be at all possible to pass out. He wanted to fall asleep and never wake up.
Quentin heard the scuff of a fine leather shoe, and Elliot loomed into the patch of ceiling directly above him, then passed by. From somewhere ambiguous in space and time, Ember's voice reached Quentin.
Not dead yet, he thought. Tough bastard. Or maybe he was just imagining it.
You have won. Take your prize, hero.
Elliot picked up the golden crown of a High King of Fillory. With an inarticulate cry, he threw it like a discus off into the darkness.
The last dream was broken. Quentin either fainted or died. He didn't know which.
Book 5. The Retreat. Quentin woke up in a beautiful white room. For a second, or was it an hour? A week? He thought it was his room in Brakebills South, that he was back in Antarctica. But then he saw that the window was open and heavy green curtains were puffing in and out and in again with the coming and going of a warm summer wind. So definitely not Antarctica.
He lay looking up at the ceiling, letting himself drift and spin along on spacey narcotic mental currents. He didn't feel even remotely curious about where he was, or how he'd gotten there. He blissed out on insignificant details. The sunlight, the smell of clean linens, a splinter of blue sky in the window, the gnarly whorls of the dark chocolate brown timbers that crossed the whitewashed ceiling. He was alive. And those nice, surprisingly pottery barny curtains, the color of the stems of plants. They were coarse woven, but it wasn't the familiar, depressing, fake, authentic coarseness of high-end earth housewares, which merely imitated the real coarseness of fabrics that were woven by hand out of genuine necessity. As he lay there, Quentin's uppermost thought was that these were authentically coarse-woven curtains. Woven by people who didn't know any other way of making curtains, who didn't even know that their way was special, and whose way was therefore not discounted and emptied of meaning in advance. This made him very happy. It was as if he'd been looking for these curtains forever, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to wake up one morning in a room in which those coarse-woven, stem-green curtains hung over the windows.
From time to time, a horsey clippity-clopping could be heard from the hall outside. This mystery solved itself when a woman with the body of a horse stepped partway into the room. The effect was surprisingly unsurprising. She was a sturdy, sun-kissed woman with short brown hair who just happened to be attached to the chassis of a sleek black mare. Quentin cleared his throat. He couldn't get it all the way clear. It was horribly dry, too dry to speak, so he just nodded.
Your recovery is nearly complete. You have been asleep for 6 months and 2 days.
The centaurus began the slow process of reversing herself, daintily, purposefully, back out into the hall. Quentin listened to her clippity-clop away. It was quiet again. He did his best to hang on to the blissful feeling, but it didn't last.
The 6 months of his recovery were practically a blank just, a quickly evaporating impression of blue depths and complex enchanted dreams. But Quentin's memories of what happened in Ember's tomb were very clear. He might reasonably have expected that day, or had it been night, to fall in a blackout period, or at least be veiled in merciful post-traumatic haziness. But no, not at all. He could remember it with perfect fidelity, deep focus, full force, from any angle right up until the moment he lost consciousness. The shock of it snapped his chest flat. It emptied out his lungs the way the beast's jaws had, not just once, but over and over again. He was helpless against it. He lay in his bed and sobbed until he choked. His weak body spasmed. He made noises he'd never heard a human being make. He ground his face into his flat, prickly straw pillow until it was wet with tears and snot. She had died for him, for all of them, and she was never coming back. He couldn't think about what happened. He could only play it back again and again, as if there were a chance it could come out differently, or even just hurt a little less. But every time he played it back, he wanted to die. His half-healed body ached all over, as if it were bruised right down to his skeleton, but he wanted it to hurt even more. He didn't know how to operate in a world that would allow this to happen. It was a shit world, a fraud and a con, and he wanted nothing more to do with it. Whenever he slept, he woke up trying to warn somebody of something, but he never knew what or who, and it was always too late. With the sorrow came anger. What had they been thinking? A bunch of kids walking into a civil war in an alien world? Alice was dead, and Fen, and probably Penny too. And the worst part was that he could have saved them all, and he hadn't. He was the one who told them it was time to go to Fillory. He'd blown the horn that summoned the beast. Alice had come because of him, to take care of him. But he hadn't taken care of her.
The centaurs watched him weep with alien unconcern, like fish. He learned over the next few days that he was in a monastery, or something like it, or that was as much as he could gather from the centaurs who ran the place. It wasn't a place of worship, they explained, with a note of whinnying condescension, but a community devoted to the most absolute possible expression, or incarnation, or perhaps realization was an even better word of the incomprehensibly complex but infinitely pure sylvan values of centaurhood, which Quentin's fallen human brain could never hope to grasp. There was something distinctly German about the centaurs. It came out, not very tactfully, that they considered humans to be inferior beings. It wasn't the humans' fault. They were simply cripples, severed by an unhappy accident at birth from their rightful horse halves. The centaurs regarded Quentin with pity nicely tempered by a near-total lack of interest. Also, they seemed to be constantly afraid that he was going to tip over. None of them had any exact memory of how Quentin had gotten here. They didn't pay close attention to the backstory of the occasional damaged human who fetched up in their midst. When pressed, Quentin's doctor, a terrifyingly earnest individual whose name was Alder Acorn Agnes Allison Fragrant Timber, said she vaguely remembered some humans, unusually filthy and bedraggled specimens, now that you mention it, bringing Quentin in on a makeshift litter. He'd been unconscious and deep in shock with his ribcage crushed and one of his forelimbs badly dislocated, practically detached. Such anatomical disorder was distasteful to the centaurs, and they were not insensible of the service the humans had rendered to Fillory in ridding it of Martin Chatwin. They did their best to render assistance. The humans lingered in the area for a month, maybe 2, while the centaurs wove deep webs of wood magic around Quentin's torn, bruised, insulted body. But they thought it unlikely that he would ever wake up. And in time, as Quentin showed no signs of recovering consciousness, the humans reluctantly departed.
He supposed he could have been angry that they had left him there, in Fillory, with no way of returning to his own world. But all he felt was warm, cowardly relief. He didn't have to face them. The sight of their faces would have burned the skin right off him with shame. He wished he had died, and if he couldn't have death, at least he had this, the next best thing, total isolation, lost forever in Fillory. He was broken in a way that magic could never fix. His body was still weak, and he spent a lot of time in bed resting his atrophied muscles. He was an empty shell, roughly hollowed out by some crude tool, gutted and left there, a limp, raw, boneless skin. If he tried, he could summon up old sense memories. Nothing from Fillory or Brakebills, just the really old stuff, the easy stuff, the safe stuff. The smell of his mother's oil paints, the lurid green of the Gowanus Canal. The curious way Julia pursed her lips around the reed of her oboe. The hurricane that blew through when they took that family vacation in Maine? He must have been about 8. When they went out on the lawn and threw their sweaters in the air and watched them sail away over the neighbor's fence and then fell down laughing. A beautiful blossoming white cherry tree stood outside his window in the warm afternoon sunlight. Every part of it moved and swayed in a slightly different rhythm from every other part. He watched it for a long time. If he was feeling daring, he thought about the time he'd spent as a goose flying south, wingtip to wingtip with Alice, buoyed up by pillowy masses of empty air, gazing coolly down at looping, squiggly, switchbacked rivers. If he did it now, he thought, he would remember to look out for the Nazcalines in Peru. He wondered if he could go back to Professor van der Vighe and have her change him back, and he would just stay that way, live and die as a stupid goose, and forget that he'd ever even been a human. Sometimes he thought of a day he'd spent with Alice on the roof of the cottage. They had a joke that they were going to play on the others when they got back from somewhere, but the others never came home, and he and Alice had just lain up there on the warm shingles all afternoon, looking at the sky and talking about nothing.
Ha! Thoughtful a few days of this went a long way. His body was healing fast and getting restless, and his brain was waking up and needed new diversions to distract it. It wouldn't leave him alone for long, onward and upward. He couldn't stop himself from getting better. Soon Quentin was out and about and exploring the grounds, a walking skeleton, severed from his past and from everything and everyone he knew. He felt as insubstantial and semi-existent as a ghost. The monastery the centaur named for it was the retreat was all stone colonnades and towering trees and wide, well-maintained paths. Despite himself, he was ravenously hungry, and although the centaurs were strict vegetarians, they turned out to be wizards with salad. At mealtimes, they set out huge, heaping wooden troughs full of spinach and lettuce and arugula and sharp dandelion greens, all delicately oiled and spiced. He discovered the centaur baths, 6 rectangular stone pools of varying temperatures, each one large enough that he could do 3 long, deep breaststrokes from one edge to the other. They reminded him of the Roman baths in Alice's parents' house. And they were deep, too. If he dove in and kicked downward with enough vigor, until the light dimmed and his hindbrain complained, and the water pressure forced its fingers into his ears, he could still just barely brush the rough stone bottom with his fingers.
His mind was an icy pond constantly in danger of thawing. He trod on it only lightly. Its surface was perilously slick, and who knew how thin? To break through would mean immersion in what was below. Cold, dark, anaerobic water and angry, toothy fish. The fish were memories. He wanted to put them away somewhere and forget where he'd put them, but he couldn't. The ice gave way at the oddest moments. When a fluffy, talking chipmunk looked up at him quizzically, when a centaur nurse was inadvertently kind to him, when he caught a glimpse of his face in a mirror. Something hideous and saurian would rise up and his eyes would flood and he would wrench himself away. The grief he felt for Alice kept unfolding new dimensions he hadn't known were there. He felt like he'd only seen and loved her, really loved her, all of her, for those last few hours. Now she was gone, broken like the glass animal she'd made that first day they'd met, and the rest of his life lay in front of him like a barren, meaningless postscript.
Thoughtful for the first few weeks after his resurrection, Quentin still felt deep aches in his chest and shoulder, but they faded as more weeks piled on top of those first few. He was at first shocked, and subsequently kind of fascinated to discover that the centaurs had replaced the skin and muscle tissue he'd lost to the beast with something that looked very much like dark fine-grained wood. 2/3 of his collarbone and most of his right shoulder and biceps now appeared to be composed of a smooth, highly polished fruitwood cherry maybe, or possibly apple. The new tissue was completely numb. He could rap on it with his knuckles and not feel a thing, but it was perfectly able to flex and bend when and where he needed it to, and it merged gracefully with the flesh around it without a seam. He liked it. Quentin's right knee was wooden now, too. He couldn't actually remember having injured that particular part of him, but whatever, maybe something untoward had happened to it on the way back. And there was another change. His hair had gone completely white, even his eyebrows, like the man-imposed descent into the maelstrom. He looked like he was wearing an Andy Warhol wig. He would do anything to keep from sitting still. He practiced with a bow and arrow on a wide, disused, weed-grown archery range. When he could get his attention, he had one of the younger centaurs teach him the rudiments of riding and fencing with a saber in the name of physical therapy. Sometimes he pretended his sparring partner was Martin Chatwin, sometimes he didn't. Either way, he never once landed a hit. A small contingent of talking animals had discovered Quentin's presence at the retreat, a badger and some oversized talking rabbits, excited by the sight and smell of a human. And from Earth at that, they had gotten it into their heads that he was the next High King of Fillory. And when he angrily insisted that he wasn't, and that he'd lost all interest in that particular ambition, they dubbed him the Reluctant King and left tributes of nuts and cabbages outside his windows and constructed pathetic handmade or paw-made crowns for him woven out of twigs and adorned with worthless quartz pebbles. He tore them apart. A small herd of tame horses roamed the wide lawns of the retreat at will. At first, Quentin thought they were just pets, but the arrangement turned out to be slightly more complex than that. Centaurs of both sexes frequently copulated with the horses, publicly and loudly. Quentin had found his few meager possessions stacked in little piles along one wall of his room. He stowed them in a dresser. They took up exactly half of one of its 5 drawers. His room also held a battered old Florida-style writing desk, painted white and pale green, and one day Quentin went rummaging through its warped, poorly fitted drawers to see what previous inmates might have left behind. It had occurred to him to attempt some written magic, a basic scrying technique to try to learn something about what had happened to the others. It almost certainly wouldn't work between planes, but you never knew. Along with an assortment of odd buttons and dried-out chestnuts and exotic Fillorian insect corpses, he found 2 envelopes. Also in the desk was a dry, tough, leafy branch. The envelopes were thick and made of the coarse, bleached white paper the centaurs made. On the first, his name was written in an elegant calligraphic handwriting that Quentin recognized as Eliot's. His vision swam. He had to sit down. Inside it was a note. It was rolled around the flattened, dehydrated remains of what was once a single Merit Ultralight cigarette, and it read as follows. Dear Q, hell of a thing getting you out of that dungeon. Richard showed up, finally, for which I suppose we should be grateful, though GD knows he doesn't make it easy. We wanted to stay, Q, but it was hard and getting harder every day. The center said it wasn't working. But if you're reading this, then you woke up after all. I'm sorry about everything. I know you are too. I know I said I didn't need a family to become who I was supposed to be, but it turned out that I did. And it was you. We'll meet again. -E. The other envelope contained a notebook. It was thick and old-looking and squashed around the corners. Kent recognized it instantly, even though he hadn't seen it since a chilly November afternoon 6 years ago. With a cold, clear mind, he sat down on his bed and opened The Magicians. The book was disappointingly short, maybe 50 handwritten pages, some of them smudged and water-damaged, and it was not written in Christopher Plover's usual plain, simple, open-hearted prose. It was cruder, funnier, more arch, and it showed signs of having been scribbled in haste with a generous assortment of misspellings and missing words. This was because it wasn't written by Christopher Plover at all. It was, the author explained in the first paragraph, the first book of Fillory and further by somebody who had actually been there. That person was Jane Chatwin. The story of the Magicians picked up immediately after the end of The Wandering Dune after Jane, the youngest, and her sister Helen, that dear self-righteous busybody, quarreled over Helen's hiding of the magic buttons that could take them to Fillory. Having failed to unearth them herself, Jane was forced to wait, but no further invitations to Fillory arrived. She and her siblings seemed fated to live out the rest of their lives on Earth as ordinary children. She supposed it was all right after all. Most children never got to go to Fillory at all. But it hardly seemed fair. The others had all gone to Fillory at least twice, and she'd only gotten to go once. And there was the matter of Martin. He was still missing after all this time. Their parents had long since given up hope, but the children hadn't. At night, Jane and the other little Chatwins crept into each other's bedrooms and whispered about him, wondering what adventures he was getting up to in Fillory, and when he would finally come home to them, as they knew he one day would. Years passed. Jane was 13, no longer a girl, as old as Martin was when he disappeared. When the call finally came, She was visited by a cooperative and industrious hedgehog named Prickleplump, who helped her recover an old cigar box containing the buttons from the old dry well down which Helen had dropped it. She could have enlisted one of the others to come with her, but instead Jane returned to Fillory alone, by way of the city, the only Chatwin ever to enter the other world without a sibling to keep her company. She found Fillory beset by a powerful wind. It blew and never stopped blowing. At first it was amusing, and everybody flew kites, and a craze for flowy clothing that billowed out on the breeze swept through the royal court at White Spire. But over time the wind became relentless. The birds were exhausted from struggling with it, and everybody's hair was getting tangled. The leaves were being stripped from the forest, and the trees were complaining. Even when you went inside and closed the door, you could still hear it groaning and feel it blowing on your face for hours afterward. Castle White Spire's wind-powered clockwork heart threatened to spin out of control and had to be decoupled from its windmills and halted for the first time in living memory. A group of eagles and griffins and pegasi allowed themselves to be borne away on the wind, convinced that it would blow them away to a fantastical land, one even more magical than Fillory. They returned a week later, coming from the other direction, hungry and disheveled and windburned. They refused to discuss what they had seen. Jane belted on a rapier, put her hair up in a tight bun, and set off into the darkling woods alone, resolute, bent forward against the gale, heading upwind in search of its source. Soon she came across Ember, alone in a clearing. He was injured and distraught. He told her of Martin's transformation, and his efforts to expel the child, which had ended with the magicians. Cast by Artel Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Thoughtful death of Umber. They held a council of war. With a bellowing bleat, Ember summoned the cozy horse, and together they mounted its broad velvet back and set off to see the dwarves. Swing players at the best of times, the dwarves could never be relied upon to cooperate with anybody, but even they were convinced that Martin was dangerous, and besides, all that wind was blowing the topsoil off their beloved underground warrens. They fashioned for Jane a silver pocket watch, a work of consummate horological mastery, so dense with tiny gears and cams and glorious spiral springs that its interior was a solid, teeming mass of gleaming clockwork. With it, the dwarves explained, Jane could control the flow of time itself, turn it forward, turn it back, speed it up, slow it down as she liked. Jane and Ember left with the pocket watch, shaking their heads. Honestly, there was never any telling what the dwarves were capable of. If they could build a time machine, you wondered why they didn't run the whole kingdom. Except, she supposed, that they couldn't be bothered. Quentin turned the last page. The book ended there. It was signed on the bottom of the last page by Jane herself.
Well, that was anticlimactic.
Potful, the truth doesn't always make a good story, does it? But I think I tied up most of the loose threads. I'm sure you can fill in the rest if you really think about it.
Quentin practically jumped out of what was left of his skin, sitting on top of his desk on the other side of the room. Very still, long legs crossed, was a small, pretty woman with dark hair and pale skin.
At least I try to make a good entrance.
She had gone native. She wore a light brown cloak over a practical gray traveling dress that was slit up the sides far enough to show some leg, but it was unmistakably her. The paramedic, and the woman who'd visited him in the infirmary, and yet that wasn't who she was at all.
You're Jane Chatwin, aren't you?
She smiled brightly and nodded.
I autographed it. Imagine what it would be worth. Sometimes I think about turning up at a Fillory convention just to see what would happen.
Thoughtful? They'd probably think you were a cosplayer, and getting a little old for it. Thoughtful, he set aside the manuscript on the bed. He had been very young when he met her for the first time, but he wasn't young anymore. As her brother Martin would have said, my, how he'd grown. Her smile was not as irresistible as it used to be. Thoughtful, you were the Watcherwoman too, weren't you?
Was and am. I suppose I could retire now that Martin is gone, though really I've only just started to enjoy myself.
Worried he expected himself to smile back at her, but the smile did not materialize. He didn't feel like smiling. Quentin couldn't have said exactly what he was feeling.
Jane remained very still, studying him as she had that first day they met. Her presence was so laden with magic and meaning and history that she almost glowed. To think she had spoken to Plover himself and told him the stories Quentin had grown up on. The circularity of it all was dizzying. The sun was setting, and the light stained Quentin's white bedspread, a dusky orange-pink. The edges of everything were softening in the twilight.
This doesn't make any sense. If you were the Watcher Woman, why did you do all those things? Stop time and all that?
Part4, this item did not come with an instruction manual. It took a bit of experimenting before I got the hang of it, and some of those experiments weren't so successful. There was one long afternoon in particular, taught by Norman in particular. People took it the wrong way. And anyhow, Plover embroidered all that stuff. What an imagination that man had!
She shook her head as if Plover's flights of fancy were the most incredible part of all this.
Thoughtful, and you know I was only 13 when I started out. I had no training in magic at all. I had to figure everything out on my own. I suppose I'm a bit of a hedge witch that way.
Thoughtful. So all those things the Watcher Woman did...
Thoughtful, a lot of it did actually happen. But I was careful. The Watcher Woman never killed anyone. I cut corners, sometimes at other people's expense, but I had other things on my mind. My job was to stop Martin, and I did what I had to. Even those clock trees. Brilliant idea, those were. They never did a bloody thing. The funniest part is that Martin was terrified of them. He couldn't figure them out.
For a moment, her face lost its composure. Just for a moment. Her eyes welled with tears, and she blinked rapidly.
I keep telling myself that we lost him that first night when he walked away into the forest. It was never him after that. Not really. He died a long time ago. But I'm the only Chatwin left now. He was a monster, but he was the last family I had.
And we killed him. His heart was palpitating. The feeling he'd had trouble identifying earlier was clarifying itself. It was rage. This woman had used him, used them all like toys. And if some of the toys got broken, oh, well. That had been the real point of the whole story all along. She had manipulated him, sent him and the others into Fillory to find Martin. She had made sure he got there. For all he knew, she'd planted the button for Lovelady to find in the first place. It didn't matter now. It was over, and Alice was dead.
He stood up. A cool, grassy evening breeze stirred the green curtains.
Thoughtful, yes. You killed him, we won.
We won? He was incredulous. He couldn't hold back anymore. All the grief and guilt he'd been salting away so carefully was coming back to him as anger. The ice was cracking. The pond was boiling. We won? You have a damn time machine in your pocket, and that's the best you could do? You set us up, Jane? Or whoever the fuck you are? We thought we were going on an adventure, and you sent us on a suicide mission, and now my friends are dead. Alice is dead. Is that really the best you could do?
I am sorry.
You're sorry. The woman was unbelievable. Good. Show me how sorry you are. Take me back. Use the watch, we'll go back in time. We'll do it all again. Let's go back and fix this.
No, Quentin. We can't go back.
What do you mean, no? We can go back. We can, and we will. He was talking at her louder and louder, staring at her, as if by talking and staring he could force her into doing what he needed her to do. She had to. And if talking wouldn't do it, he could make her. She was a small woman, and apart from that watch, he was willing to bet that he was twice the magician she'd ever be.
She was shaking her head sadly.
You have to understand. I'm a witch, I'm not a god. I've tried this so many ways. I've gone down so many different timelines. I've sent so many other people to fight Martin. Don't make me lecture you on the practicalities of chronological manipulation, Quentin. Change one variable and you change them all. Did you think you were the first one to face Martin in that room? Do you think that was even the first time you faced him? That battle has been fought again and again? I've tried it so many different ways. Everyone always died, and I always wound back the clock. As bad as it was, as bad as it is, this is by far the best outcome I've ever achieved. No one ever stopped him but you and your friends, Quentin. You were the only ones, and I'm sticking with it. I can't risk losing everything we've gained.
Quentin folded his arms. Muscles were jumping in his back. He was practically vibrating with fury.
Well then, we'll go back all the way. To before the world in the walls. Stop him before it all starts. Find a timeline where he doesn't even go to Fillory.
I've tried, Quentin. I've tried. He always does. I've tried it 1,000 times. There is no world where he doesn't. I'm tired. I know you lost Alice. I lost my brother. I'm tired of fighting that thing that used to be Martin.
Suddenly, she did look very tired, and her eyes lost their focus, as if she were seeing into some other world, one she would never get to. It made it hard for him to keep up his high-pressure rage. It kept bleeding away even as he stoked it. This wasn't over. He lunged, but she saw it coming. He was quick, but she was quicker. Maybe they played this scene already in another timeline, or maybe he was just that obvious. Before he was halfway across the room, she spun on her heel and threw the silver watch as hard as she could at the wall. It was hard enough. The wall was stone, and the watch squashed like an overripe fruit. The delicate crystal face shattered, and tiny gears and wheels skittered away across the floor like pearls from a broken necklace. Jane turned back to him defiantly, breathing hard. He stared down at the corpse of the broken timepiece.
No more. Put an end to it. It's time to live with what we have and mourn what we lost. I wish I could have told you more before it was too late, but I needed you too much to tell you the truth.
In a curious gesture, she placed her hands on his cheeks, drew his face down to hers, and kissed him on the forehead. The room was almost dark now. The door creaked in the quiet spring evening as she opened it.
Try not to judge Martin too harshly. Plover used to diddle him whenever he could get him alone. I think that's why you went to Fillory in the first place. Why else would he try to crawl into a grandfather clock? He was looking for somewhere to hide.
With that, she was gone. Quentin didn't go after her, just stared at the doorway for a long minute. When he walked over to the door to close it, pieces of the broken watch scrunched under his feet.
It just went down and down. Had he finally gotten to the bottom of it? In the last of the dying light, he looked down at the notebook on the hard centaur bed. There was a note tucked into the pages, the same one the wind had snatched away from him the first time he tried to read it. But all it said was, "Surprise." He sat back down. In the end, he and Alice had just been bit players, extras, who had the bad luck to wander into a battle scene. A brother and sister at war with each other in their nightmare nursery fantasy land. No one cared that Alice was dead, and no one cared that he wasn't. Now he had answers. But they weren't doing what answers were supposed to do. They weren't making things simpler or easier. They weren't helping. Sitting there on his bed, he thought about Alice. And poor, stupid Penny. And miserable Elliot. And that poor bastard Martin Chatwin. He got it now, of course. Finally. He'd been going about this all wrong. He should never have come here at all. He should never have fallen in love with Alice. He should never even have come to Brakebills. He should have stayed in Brooklyn, in the real world. He should have nursed his depression and his grudge against the world from the relative safety of mundane reality. He never would have met Alice, but at least she would be alive, somewhere. He could have eked out his sad, wasted life with movies and books and masturbation and alcohol like everybody else. He would never have known the horror of really getting what he thought he wanted. He could have spared himself and everybody else the cost of it. If there was a moral to the story of Martin Chatwin, that was it, in a nutshell. Sure, you can live out your dreams, but it'll only turn you into a monster. Better to stay home and do card tricks in your bedroom instead. It was partly Jane's fault, of course. She had lured him on at every turn. Well, he wouldn't get fooled again. He wouldn't give anybody the chance. Quentin felt a new attitude of detachment descend on him. His molten anger and grief were cooling into a glossy protective coating, a hard transparent lacquer of uncaring. If he couldn't go back, he would just have to do things differently going forward. He felt how infinitely safer and more sound this attitude was. The trick was just not wanting anything. That was power. That was courage. The courage not to love anyone or hope for anything.
Thoughtful. The funny thing about it was how easy everything got when nothing mattered. Over the next few weeks, the new Quentin, with his white Warhol hair and his wooden Pinocchio shoulder, took up his magical studies again. What was wanted now was control. He wanted to be untouchable. In his little cell, Quentin practiced things he'd never had time to master before or never dared to try. He went back to the most advanced pauper exercises, gruesomely difficult, only theoretically executable etudes that he'd faked his way through back at Brakebills. Now he repeated them over and over again, smoothing out the rough edges. He invented new, even crueler versions and mastered them as well. He relished the pain in his hands, ate it up. Thoughtful, his enchantments took on a power and precision and fluency they'd never had before. His fingertips left tracks of fire and sparks and neon indigo smears in the air that buzzed and whined too bright to look at directly. His brain glowed with cold, brittle triumph. This was what Penny had been looking for when he went to Maine, but Quentin was actually doing it. Only now, he thought, now that he had killed off his human emotions, only now that he didn't care anymore could he wield truly superhuman power. Thoughtful as the sweet spring air drifted through his room and then the oven-hot summer air and sweat poured down his face, and the centaurs trotted by outside his door, lofty and incurious. He came to see how Mayakovsky had performed some of the feats Quentin had found so baffling. In an empty meadow, he carefully reverse-engineered Penny's flashy fireball spell. He found and corrected the mistakes he'd made in his senior project, the trip to the moon, and he finished Alice's project too, in memoriam, isolating and capturing a single photon and even observing it. Heisenberg be damned. An infinitely furious, precious, incandescent little wave spark. Seated in the lotus position on top of the sun-faded Florida desk, he allowed his mind to expand until it encompassed one, then 3 more, then 6 field mice in all as they went about their tiny urgent business in the grass outside his window. He summoned them to sit before him, and with a thought, gently extinguished the electrical current that lived within each of them. Their little fluffy bodies went still and cold. Then, just as easily, he touched each of them with magic, instantly relighting their tiny souls as if he were touching a match to the pilot light of a stove. Thoughtful panicked, they scrambled in all directions. He let them go. Alone in his room, he smiled at his secret greatness. He felt lordly and munificent. He had tampered with the sacred mystery of life and death. What else was there in this world that could engage his attention? Or in any world? June ripened into July, then burst and withered and dried and became August. One morning, Quentin woke up early to find a cool mist hanging low over the lawn outside his first-floor window. Standing there in plain view, looking huge and ethereal, was a white stag. It bent to crop the grass with its small mouth, tilting its grand, top-heavy rack of antlers, and he could see the muscles working in its neck. Its ears were bigger and floppier than he would have expected. It raised its head again when Quentin appeared in the window, conscious of being observed, then sauntered off across the lawn and disappeared unhurriedly from view. Frowning, Quentin watched it go. He went back to bed but couldn't sleep. Later in the day, he sought out Alder Acorn Agnes Allison Fragrant Timber. He found her working an elaborate room-size loom built to harness both the pumping power of her muscular back legs and the delicate manipulations of her human fingers.
Thoughtful, the questing beast. It is a rare sight. Undoubtedly, it was drawn here by the positive energies radiated by our superior values. You are fortunate that it offered itself to some centaur's sight while you happened to be watching.
The questing beast, from the girl who told time. So that was what it looked like. Somehow he'd expected something more ferocious. Quentin patted Agnes on her glossy black hindquarters and left. He knew what he had to do. That night, he took out the leafy branch he had found in the writing desk. It was the branch that had hung in front of the beast's face, which it had tossed aside right before their battle. The branch was dead and dried now, but its leaves were still olive and rubbery. He stuck its hard stem in the moist turf and mounded up some dirt to make sure it stayed upright. The next morning, Quentin woke to find a fully grown tree outside his window. Set into its trunk was the face of a softly ticking clock. He put his hand on the tree's hard gray trunk, feeling its cool, dusty bark, then let it drop. His time here was over. He packed a few possessions, abandoned others, stole a bow and a quiver of arrows from the shed by the archery range, liberated a horse from the centaur's feral sex herd, and left the retreat. The white stag. The hunt for the questing beast took him to the edge of the vast northern marsh, then back south, skirting the edge of the great bramble, then north again, angling west through the darkling woods as far as the vast, gently gurgling expanse of the lower Slosh. It was like visiting places he'd seen in dreams. He drank from streams and slept on the ground and ate fire-roasted game. He had become a passable archer, and when he couldn't hit something on his own, he used magic to cheat. He rode his horse hard. She was a gentle bay who didn't seem very sorry to leave the centaurs behind. Quentin's mind was as empty of thoughts as the woods and fields were of people. The pond in his head was frozen again, a foot thick this time. On his best days, he could go hours without thinking about Alice.
Thoughtful. If he thought of anything, it was the white stag. He was on a quest, but it was his quest now, nobody else's. He scanned the skyline for the prickle of its antlers and thickets for the flash of its pale flank. He knew what he was doing. This was what he'd dreamed about all the way back in Brooklyn. This was the primal fantasy. When he had finished it, he could close the book for good.
The questing beast led him even farther west, through the hills of the Chankly Bore, over a pass in a bitterly sharp mountain range, beyond anything he recognized or had ever heard of from the Fillory books. He was in virgin territory now, but he didn't stop to explore or name the peaks. He descended a blazing white chalk cliff to a strip of volcanic black sand on the shore of a great, undiscovered western sea. When it spotted him still in pursuit, the stag bounded out onto the surf as if it were dry land. It leaped from breaker to breaker and swell to swell, like it was jumping from crag to crag, antlers erect, shaking its head and snuffing sea foam from its nostrils. Quentin sighed. The next day, he sold the gentle bay and booked passage across the western sea. He managed to hire a nimble sloop named Embarrassingly Enough. The Skywalker, crewed by an efficient foursome of 3 taciturn brothers and their burly suntanned sister. Without speaking, they swarmed through Skywalker's fiendishly idiosyncratic rigging, which consisted of 24 small, latent sails that required constant minor adjustments. They were awed by his wooden prosthetics. 2 weeks out, they put in at a jolly tropical archipelago, a sun-drenched scatter pattern of mango swamps and sheep meadows to take on fresh water. Then they pushed on. They passed an island inhabited by angry, bloodthirsty giraffes and a floating beast that offered them an extra year of life in exchange for a finger. The sister took the beast up on it ×3. They passed an ornate wooden staircase that spiraled down into the ocean, and a young woman adrift on an open book the size of a small island in which she scribbled tirelessly. None of these adventures inspired in Quentin anything resembling wonder or curiosity. All that was over for him. 5 weeks out, they made landfall on a scorched black rock, and the crew threatened to mutiny if they didn't turn back. Quentin stared them down, then bluffed about his magical powers, then finally quintupled their pay. They sailed on. Being brave was easy when you would rather die than give up. Fatigue meant nothing when you actually wanted to suffer. Before this, Quentin had never been on a sailboat big enough to have a jib, but now he was as lean and brown and salty-skinned as his crew. The sun became huge, and the seawater grew hot against the Skywalker's gunwales. Everything felt electrically charged. Ordinary objects gave off strange optical effects, flares and sunspots and coronas. The stars were low, burning orbs, visibly spherical, pregnant with illegible meaning. A powerful golden light shone through everything, as if the world were only a thin scrim behind which a magnificent sun was shining. The stag kept bounding on ahead of them. The horizon unknown continent filled the horizon. It was wrapped in a magical winter and thickly wooded with fir trees that grew right up to the shore so that the salt water lapped at their tangled roots. Quentin dropped anchor and told the crew, who were shivering in their thin tropical clothes, to wait a week and then leave without him if he wasn't back. He gave them the rest of the gold he'd brought, kissed the 7-fingered sister goodbye, lowered the sloop's kai and rowed himself to shore. Strapping his bow to his back, he pushed his way into the snow-choked forest. It was good to be alone again. The questing beast showed itself on the 3rd night. Quentin had made camp on a low bluff overlooking a clear, spring-fed pool. Just before dawn, he woke to find it standing at the water's edge. Its reflection shivered as it lapped the cold water. He waited for a minute, on one knee. This was it. He strung his bow and slipped an arrow from his quiver. Looking down from the low bluff with the early morning air almost dead, it wasn't even a difficult shot. At the moment of release, he thought, I'm doing what even the Chatwins failed to do, Helen and Rupert. He didn't feel the pleasure he thought he would. He put his shaft through the tough meat of the white stag's muscular right thigh. He winced. Thank God he hadn't hit an artery. It didn't try to flee, just sat stiffly on its haunches like an injured cat. He had the impression from its resigned expression that the questing beast had to go through this kind of thing once a century or so. The cost of doing business. Its blood looked black in the pre-dawn twilight. It showed no fear as Quentin approached. It reached back with its supple neck and grasped the arrow firmly in its square white teeth. With a jerk, the shaft came free. It spat out the arrow at Quentin's feet.
Neutral hurts. That.
It had been 3 days since Quentin had spoken to anybody.
Neutral wishes, of course. You get 3.
My friend Penny lost his hands. Fix them.
The stag's eyes defocused momentarily in thought.
I cannot. I am sorry. He is either dead or not in this world.
The sun was just beginning to come up over the dark, massed fir forest. Quentin took a deep breath. The cold air smelled fresh and turpentiney.
Alice. She turned into some kind of spirit, a Niffin. Bring her back.
Again, I cannot.
What do you mean you can't? It's a wish.
Neutral. I don't make the rules. You don't like it, find some other magic stag and shoot it instead.
I wish that the rules were different.
No. And I'm counting those 3 together as your first wish. What's number 2?
He hadn't really allowed himself to hope. Neutral pay off my crew, double what I promised them.
Neutral done.
Neutral, that's 10 times their base salary since I already quintupled it?
Neutral. I said done, didn't I? What's number 3?
Thoughtful years ago, Quentin had worked out exactly what he would wish for if anybody ever gave him the chance. He would wish to travel to Fillory and to be allowed to stay there forever. But that was years ago. Send me home.
The questing beast closed its round brown eyes gravely, then opened them. It dipped its antlers toward him.
Neutral done.
Quentin supposed he could have been more specific. By rights, the questing beast could have sent him back to Brooklyn, or to his parents' house in Chesterton, or to Brakebills, or even to the house upstate. But the stag went the literal way with it, and Quentin wound up in front of his last semi-permanent residence, the apartment building in Tribeca that he'd shared with Alice. Nobody noticed as he abruptly came into being in the middle of the sidewalk in the late morning of what appeared to be an early summer day. He walked away quickly. He couldn't even look at their old doorway. He left his bow and arrows in a trash can. It was a shock to suddenly be surrounded by so many of his fellow human beings again at such close quarters. Their mottled skins and flawed physiognomies and preening vanities were less easy to ignore. Maybe some of that centaur snobbery had rubbed off on him. A revolting stew of fragrances both organic and inorganic invaded his nose. The front page of a newspaper acquired at the corner deli informed him that he'd been gone from Earth for a little over 2 years. He would have to call his parents. Fog would have kept them from fretting too much, but still, it almost made him smile to think of seeing them now. What the hell would they say about his hair? Soon, but not yet. He walked around, getting reacclimated. The spells involved in retrieving cash from an ATM were child's play now. He got a shave and a haircut and bought some clothes that weren't made by centaurs and hence didn't look like a Renaissance fair costume. He babied himself. He had lunch at a fancy steakhouse and nearly died with pleasure. By 3 o'clock, he was drinking Moscow mules in a long, dark, empty basement bar in Chinatown, where he used to go with the physical kids. It had been a long time since he'd drunk alcohol. It had a dangerous thawing effect on his frozen brain. The ice that kept his feelings of guilt and sorrow under control creaked and groaned, but he kept on with it, and soon a deep, pure, luxurious sadness came over him, as heady and decadent as a drug. The place started filling up at 5. By 6, the after-work drinkers were jostling Quentin at the bar. He could see that the light falling down the stairs out front had changed. He was on his way out when he noticed a slender, pretty girl with blonde curls nuzzling a man who looked like an underwear model in a corner booth. Quentin didn't know the underwear model from Adam, but the pretty girl was definitely an ace. Wasn't the reunion he would have wanted, nor was she the person he would have chosen to reunite with. But maybe it was better this way, with somebody he didn't care too much about who didn't care too much about him either. And he had those trusty Moscow mules to carry some of the load for him. Baby steps. They sat outside on the stairway. She put her hand on his arm and goggled at his white hair.
You would not have believed, Eve. Oddly, her pan-European accent had deepened, and her English grammar worsened since he'd seen her last. Possibly played better in the bar scene. The time we had getting out. It was quiet for a while, and then they rush us again. Josh was very good, you know. Very good. I had never seen him work magic like that. There was a thing that swam in the floor, under the stones like a shark, I think, but it swam in the stones. It got hold of your leg.
That might explain this.
He showed her his wooden knee and she goggled all over again. The alcohol was making all this much easier than expected. He was braced for a torrent of emotion, a cavalry charge of grief on his defenseless peace of mind. But if it was coming, it hadn't yet.
Hurtful. And there was a spell in the walls. I think so. We ended up in Amber's room again.
And rapid-wise to then.
Ah, thoughtful, what did I say? Anyhow, we had to break the spell, and we carried you the whole way. Me God. I don't think we would have made it if Richard Rissard hadn't found us. It almost makes you like him, you know. He had a way of making us invisible to the monsters. He practically carried us out of that place. Still, I have a scar.
She flounced up the hem of her skirt, which was none too long to begin with. A thick, bumpy keloid strip 6 inches long stood out from her smooth, tanned thigh. Amazingly, Penny had survived, she told him, or at least he had for a while. The centaurs were unable to reconstruct his hands, and without them he could no longer cast spells. When they reached the Netherlands, Penny walked away from the rest of the party as if he were searching for something. When he came to a tall, narrow stone palazzo, unusually old and worn, he stopped in front of it and spread out his handless arms as if in supplication. After a minute, the doors of the palazzo opened. The others caught a glimpse of ranks of bookcases, the warm, secret paper heart of the city. Penny stepped inside and the doors closed behind him.
He's thoughtful. Can you believe it even all happened? It is like a cauchemar.
Thoughtful it was strange. Anais didn't seem to blame him or herself. She had found some way of mourning what had happened. Or maybe it hadn't touched her to begin with. It was hard to guess what went on under those blonde curls. Throughout the story, she kept looking over his shoulder at the underwear model, and after a while, he took pity on her and let her go. They said goodbye kiss. Kiss. Neither party promised to keep in touch. What was the point of lying now at this late stage in the game? Like she said, it was all over now. He stayed sitting outside on the steps in the warm, early hours of the summer evening until it crossed his mind how much he didn't want to run into Anais again on her way out.
It was getting dark and he would need somewhere to sleep tonight. He could find a hotel, but why bother? And why wait? He had abandoned almost everything he owned back in Fillory, but one thing Quentin had hung on to was the iron key Fogg had given him when he graduated. It hadn't worked from Fillory, he'd tried, but now, standing by himself on a trash-littered street in Tribeca, breathing the soupy, sun-warmed city air, he took it out of the pocket of his brand-new jeans. It felt reassuringly hefty. On a hunch, he held it up to his ear. It gave off a high, constant musical ringing tone, like a struck tuning fork. He'd never noticed that before. Feeling grandly lonely and only a little frightened, he gripped the key with both hands, closed his eyes, relaxed, and let it tug him forward. It was like riding the rope tow at a ski slope. The key parted an invisible seam in the air and drew him swiftly forward and with a delightful sense of acceleration through some highly convenient sub-dimension back to the stone terrace out behind the house at Brakebills. The pain of going back was great, but the necessity was greater. He had one last piece of business to take care of, and then it really would all be over forever. Kings and queens. As the junior member of the Plaxco account team, associate management consultant Quentin Coldwater had few actual responsibilities beyond attending the occasional meeting and being civil to whatever colleagues he happened to bump into in the elevator. On the rare occasions when actual documents managed to make their way into his inbox or onto his desk, he rubber-stamped them. Looks good to me. QC. Without reading them and sent them on their way. Quentin's desk was, as it happened, unusually large for a new hire at his level, especially one as youthful as he appeared to be, though his startling white hair lent him a certain gravitas beyond his years, and whose educational background and previous work history were on the sketchy side. He just appeared one day, took possession of a corner office recently vacated by a vice president 3 times his age, and started drawing a salary and piling up money in his 401k and receiving medical and dental benefits and taking 6 weeks of vacation a year, in return for which he didn't seem to do much of anything beyond play computer games on the ultra-flat double-widescreen monitor the outgoing Veep had left behind. But Quentin didn't inspire any resentment in his new colleagues or even any particular curiosity. Everybody thought somebody else knew the story on him, and if it turned out that they didn't, they definitely knew for a fact that somebody over in HR had the scoop. And anyway, supposedly he'd been a superstar at some high-flying European school fluent in all kinds of languages. Math scores through the roof. The firm was lucky to have him. Lucky. And he was affable enough, if a little mopey. He seemed smart, or at least he looked smart. And anyway, he was a member of the Plaxco account team, and here at the consulting firm of Grunning's Hunsucker Swan, everybody was a team player. Dean Fogg had advised Quentin against it. He should take more time, think it over. Maybe get some therapy. But Quentin had taken enough time. He had seen enough of the magical world to last him the rest of his life. And he was erecting a barrier between himself and it that no magic could breach. He was going to cut it off and kill it dead. Fogg had been right after all, even if he didn't have the guts to make good on his own argument. People were better off without magic living in the real world, learning to deal with it as it came. Maybe there were people out there who could handle the power a magician could wield, who deserved it, but Quentin wasn't one of them. it was time he grew up and faced that fact. So Fogg set him up with a desk job at a firm with large amounts of magician money invested in it, and Quentin took the subway and rode the elevator and ordered in lunch like the rest of humanity. Or at any rate, the most privileged 0.1% of it. His curiosity about the realms invisible had been more than satisfied, thanks tremendously much. At least his parents were pleased. It was a relief to be able to tell them what he did for a living and not lie. Grunning's Hunsucker Swan was absolutely everything Quentin had hoped it would be, which was as close to nothing at all as he could get and still be alive. His office was calm and quiet, with climate control and tinted floor-to-ceiling windows. Office supplies were abundant and top-notch. He was given all the balance sheets and org charts and business plans to review that he could possibly have wanted. To be honest, Quentin felt superior to anybody who still messed around with magic. They could delude themselves if they liked, those self-indulgent magical mandarins, but he'd outgrown that stuff. He wasn't a magician anymore. He was a man. And a man took responsibility for his actions. He was out here working the hard, flinty bedrock face of it all. Fillory? He'd been there and done that, and it hadn't done him or anybody else any good. He was damn lucky he got out alive. Every morning, Quentin put on a suit and stood on an old elevated subway platform in Brooklyn, raw cement stained with rust by the bits of iron rebar poking out of it. From the uptown end, he could just barely see the tiny hazy Eriginous spike of the Statue of Liberty out in the bay.
In the summertime, the thick wooden ties sweated aromatic beads of liquid black tar. Invisible signals caused the tracks to shift and shunt the trains left and right as if, but not actually, directed by unseen hands. Nearby, unidentifiable birds swirled in endless cyclonic circles above a poorly maintained dumpster.
Every morning when the train arrived, it was full of young Russian women riding in from Brighton Beach, 3/4 asleep, swaying in unison to the rocking of the car. Their lustrous dark hair dyed a hideous, unconvincing blonde. In the marble lobby of the building where Quentin worked, elevators ingested pods of commuters and then spat them out on their respective floors. When he left work every day at 5, the entire sequence repeated itself in reverse. As for his weekends, there was no end to the multifarious, meaningless entertainments and distractions with which the real world supplied Quentin. Video games, internet porn, people talking on their cell phones in bodegas about their stepmother's medical conditions, weightless supermarket plastic bags snagged in leafless trees, old men sitting on their stoops with no shirts on, the oversized windshield wipers on blue and white city buses slinging huge gouts of rainwater back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was all he had left, and it would have to be enough. As a magician, he had been among the world's silent royalty, but he had abdicated his throne. He had doffed his crown and left it lying there for the next sucker to put on. Le Roi's more. It was a kind of enchantment in itself, this new life of his, the ultimate enchantment, the enchantment to end all enchantments forever. One day, having leveled up 3 different characters in 3 different computer games, and run through every website he could plausibly and even implausibly want to surf, Quentin noticed that his Outlook calendar was telling him that he was supposed to be at a meeting. It had started half an hour ago, and it was on a fairly remote floor of GHS's corporate monolith, necessitating the use of a different elevator bank. But throwing caution to the wind, he decided to attend. The purpose of this particular meeting, Quentin gathered from some hastily harvested context clues, was a joint post-mortem of the Plaxco restructuring, which had apparently been triumphantly wrapped up some weeks earlier, though Quentin had somehow missed that crucial detail till now. Also on the agenda was a new related project just kicking off, to be conducted by another team consisting of people Quentin had never met before. He found himself sneaking glances at one of them. It was hard to say what stood out about her, except that she was the only person besides Quentin who never spoke once during the entire meeting. She was some years older than him and not notably attractive or unattractive. Sharp nose, thin mouth, chin length, mousy brown hair, with an air of powerful intelligence held in check by boredom. He wasn't sure how he knew. Maybe it was her fingers, which had a familiar muscular, overdeveloped look. Maybe it was her features, which had a mask-like quality. But there was no question what she was. She was another one like him, a former Brakebillion in deep cover in the real world. The Thick Plottins. Quentin buttonholed a colleague afterward, Dan Dean, one of those, and found out her name. It was Emily Greenstreet, the one and only and infamous. The girl Alice's brother had died for. Quentin's hand shook as he pressed the elevator buttons. He informed his assistant that he would be taking the rest of the afternoon off. Maybe the rest of the week, too. But it was too late. Emily Greenstreet must have spotted him. 2. Maybe it really was the fingers, because before the day was over, he had an email from her. The next morning, she left him a voicemail and attempted to remotely insert a lunch date into his Outlook calendar. When he got online, she eyed him relentlessly, and finally, having gotten his cell phone number off the company's emergency contact list, she texted him, "Why? Post upon the inevitable."
Thoughtful, why not? He thought, but he knew she was right. He didn't really have a choice. If she wanted to find him, then sooner or later she would. With a sense of defeat, he clicked accept on the lunch invitation. They met the following week at a grandly expensive old-school French restaurant that had been beloved of GHS executives since time immemorial.
It wasn't as bad as he thought. She was a fast-talking woman, so skinny, and with such erect posture that she looked brittle. Seated across from each other, almost alone in a hushed circle of cream tablecloths and glassware and heavy clinking silverware, they gossiped about work. He hardly knew enough of the names to keep up, but she talked enough for both of them. She told him about her life-nice apartment, Upper East Side, roof deck, cats. They found that they had a funny kind of black humor in common. In different ways, they had both discovered the same truth, that to live out childhood fantasies as a grown-up was to court and wed in bed disaster. Who could possibly know that better than they, the man who watched Alice die, and the woman who'd essentially killed Alice's brother? When he looked at her, he saw himself 8 years down the line. It didn't look all that bad. And she liked a drink or five, so they had that in common too. Martini glasses, wine bottles, and whiskey tumblers piled up between them. A miniature metropolis of varicolored glass, while their cell phones and Blackberries plaintively, futilely tried to attract their attention.
Thoughtful. So tell me, when they'd both imbibed enough to create the illusion of a comfortable, long-standing intimacy between them, do you miss it? Doing magic?
Neutral, I can honestly say I never think about it. Why? Do you?
Thoughtful. Miss it or think about it? Of course I do. Both.
Thoughtful, are you ever sorry you left Brakebills?
The only thing I regret is not leaving that place sooner. Just thinking about that place now gives me the howling fantods. They're just kids, Quentin, with all that power. What happened to Charlie and me could happen again to any one of them, any day, any minute. Or worse. Much worse. It's amazing that place is still standing. I don't even like living on the same coast with it. There's practically no safeguards at all. Every one of those kids is a nuclear bomb waiting to go off. Somebody needs to get control of that place. Sometimes I think I should blow their cover, get the real government in there, get it properly regulated. The teachers will never do it. The magician's court will never do it.
She chattered on in that vein. They were like two recovering alcoholics, hopped up on caffeine and 12-step gospel, telling each other how glad they were to be sober and then talking about nothing but drinking. Though unlike recovering alcoholics, they could and did drink plenty of alcohol. Temporarily revived by a molten affogato, Quentin went to work on a bitter single-malt scotch that tasted like it had been decanted through the stump of an oak tree that had been killed by lightning.
Never felt safe in that place. Never. Not for a minute. Don't you feel safer out here, Quentin? In the real world?
If you want to know the truth, these days I don't feel much of anything.
Really? Then what made you give it all up, Quentin? You must have had a good reason.
I would say my motives were pretty much unimpeachable.
Thoughtful? That bad? Tell me.
She sat back and let the restaurant's fancy easy chair embrace her. Nothing a recovering addict likes more than a tale of how bad it had been in the old days, and how low a fellow addict had sunk. Let the one-downsmanship begin. He told her just how low he'd sunk. He told her about Alice and their life together, and what they had done, and how she had died. When he revealed the specifics of Alice's fate, Emily's smile vanished, and she took a shaky slurp from her martini glass. After all, Charlie had become a Niffin too. The irony was quite comprehensively hideous, but she didn't ask him to stop. When he was finished, he expected her to hate him as much as he hated himself. As much, perhaps, as Quentin suspected she hated herself. But instead, her eyes were brimming over with kindness.
Oh, Quentin. You can't blame yourself. Truly, you can't. You need to see that all this evil, all this sadness, it all comes from magic. It's where all your trouble began. Nobody can be touched by that much power without being corrupted. It's what corrupted me, Quentin, before I gave it up. It's the hardest thing I ever did. It's what killed Charlie.
And it killed your poor Alice, too. Sooner or later, magic always leads to evil. Once you see that, then you'll see how to forgive yourself. It will get easier. I promise you.
Thoughtful, her pity was like a salve for his raw, chafed heart, and he wanted to accept it. She was offering it to him. It was right there across the table. All he had to do was reach out for it.
The check arrived and Quentin charged the astronomical sum to his corporate card. In the restaurant's foyer, they were both so drunk that they had to help each other into their raincoats. It had been pissing rain all day. There was no question of going back to the office. He was in no shape for that, and anyway, it was already getting dark. It had been a very long lunch. Outside under the awning, they hesitated. For a moment, Emily Greenstreet's funny, flat mouth came unexpectedly close to his.
Thoughtful, have dinner with me tonight. Come to my apartment, I'll cook for you.
Can't do it tonight. I'm sorry. Next time, maybe.
Thoughtful, listen, Quentin. I know you think you're not ready for this.
I know I'm not ready.
But you'll never be ready. Not until you decide to be. Enough drama, Quentin. Let me help you. It's not the worst thing in the world, admitting you need help. Is it?
Thoughtful, her kindness was the most touching thing he'd seen since he left Brakebills, and he hadn't had sex. Good God, since the time he'd slept with Janet. It would be so easy to go with her. But he didn't. Even as they stood there, he felt something tingle in his fingertips. Under his fingernails, some residue left by the thousands of spells that had flowed through them over the years. He could still feel them there, the hot white sparks that had once come streaming so freely from his hands. She was wrong. Blaming magic for Alice's death wasn't going to help him. It was too easy, and he'd had enough of doing things the easy way. It was all well and good for Emily Greenstreet to forgive him, but people were responsible for Alice's death. Jane Chatwin was, and Quentin was, and so was Alice herself, and people would have to atone for it. In that instant, he looked at Emily Greenstreet and saw a lost soul, alone in a howling wasteland, not so different from the way her one-time lover Professor Mayakovsky had looked standing alone at the South Pole. He wasn't ready to join her there. But where else could he go? What would Alice have done?
Another month went by, and it was November, and Quentin was sitting in his corner office staring out the window. The building across the street was considerably shorter than the Grunnings Hunsucker Swan building, so he had a clear view of its rooftop, which consisted of a neat beige gravel walkway running around a gray grid of massive, complicated air conditioning and heating units.
With the coming of the bitter late fall weather, the air conditioning had gone silent and the heaters had sprung into life, and huge nebulae of steam curled off them in abstract whirls. Hypnotic, silent, slowly turning shapes that never stopped and never repeated themselves. Smoke signals sent by no one to no one, signifying nothing. Lately, Quentin spent a lot of time watching them. His assistant had quietly given up attempting to schedule appointments for him. All at once, and with no warning, the tinted floor-to-ceiling window that made up one entire wall of Quentin's office shattered and burst inward. Quentin's ultra-modern, narrow-whale Venetian blinds went crazily askew. Cold air and raw, unfiltered sunlight came flooding in. Something small, round, and very heavy rolled across the carpet and bumped into his shoe. He looked down at it. It was a bluish marble sphere, the stone globe they used to use to start a welter's match. 3 people were floating in midair outside his window, 30 stories up. Janet looked older somehow, which of course she was, but there was something else different about her. Her eyes, the irises, radiated a seething violet, mystical energy like nothing Quentin had ever seen before. She wore a tight, black leather bustier that she was in imminent danger of spilling out of. Silver stars were falling all around her. Elliot had acquired a pair of immense white feathery wings somewhere that spread out behind him, with which he hovered on an intangible wind. On his head was the golden crown of Fillory that Quentin had last seen in Ember's underground chamber. Between Janet and Elliot, her arms wrapped in black silk, floated a tall, painfully skinny woman with long, wavy black hair that undulated in the air as if she were underwater.
Neutral hello, Quentin.
The other woman didn't say anything. Neither did Quentin.
Thoughtful? We're going back to Fillory, and we need another king. 2 kings, 2 queens.
Thoughtful, you can't hide forever, Quentin. Come with us.
With the tinted window gone and the afternoon sunlight pouring into his office, Quentin couldn't read his monitor anymore. The climate control was howling, trying to fight off the cold air. Somewhere in the building, an alarm went off.
It could work this time, with Martin gone. And besides, we never figured out what your discipline was. Doesn't that bother you?
Quentin stared at them. It was a few seconds before he found his voice.
Worried? What about Josh? Go ask him.
He's got another project. He thinks he can use the Netherlands to get to Middle-earth. He honestly believes he's going to bone an elf.
I thought about being a queen. Turns out they're very open-minded about that kind of thing in Fillory. But at the end of the day, rules is rules.
Quentin put down his coffee. It had been a long time since he'd experienced any emotion at all other than sadness and shame and numbness. So long that for a moment he didn't understand what was happening inside him. In spite of himself, he felt sensation coming back to some part of him that he'd thought was dead forever. It hurt, but at the same time he wanted more of it. Why are you doing this? After what happened to Alice? Why would you go back there? And why would you want me with you? You're only going to make it worse.
What? Worse than this?
Thoughtful. We all knew what we were doing. You knew it. We knew it. Alice certainly knew it. We made our choices, Q. And what's going to happen? Your hair's already white. You can't look any weirder than you already do.
Quentin swiveled around to face them in his ergonomic desk chair. His heart felt like it was burning with relief and regret, the emotions melting and running together and turning into bright, hot, white light. The thing is, I'd hate to cut out right before bonus season.
Come on, Quentin, it's over. You've done your time. Everybody's forgiven you but you, and you are so far behind us.
You might be surprised about that.
Quentin picked up the bluestone ball and studied it.
Haha, thoughtful. So I'm gone for 5 minutes, and you have to bring in a hedge witch.
She's got chops.
Fuck you.
Quentin sighed. He unkinked his neck and stood up.
Did you really have to break my window?
No, not really.
Quentin walked to the floor's edge. Sprays of smashed window glass crunched on the carpet under his fancy leather shoes. He ducked under the broken blinds. It was a long way down. He hadn't done this for a while. Loosening his tie with one hand, Quentin stepped out into the cold, clear winter air and flew.